Held on August 10th, 2022, and the time is 10 a.m. Pacific. This meeting is occurring at the Department of Consumer Affairs headquarters, the hearing room located at 1747 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California, 95834. Today's meeting will be conducted using the following guidelines. All participants mute their microphone during each presentation of the agenda topic. At the conclusion of the discussion from the board members, I will ask for public comment. At the conclusion of the discussion period, I will call for a vote, if necessary, or move to the next agenda item. All in attendance should keep their comments specific to the agenda item being discussed. An opportunity for public comment for items not on the agenda will be provided. And please be advised that during this comment period, the board cannot engage in discussions or take any action on any matter that is raised in public discussion, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. We'll now establish a quorum. Oh. Machiko, will you call the roll?
Sorry.
All right. Will you call? Oh, I'm sorry.
Dr. Buhari.
Here, present.
Dr. Jensen. Andrew Marino. Gary Damian.
Present.
Denise Pine.
Present.
Dr. Kim, who is making his way out. We'll do Dr. Patel.
Present.
And then Dr. Kim. You have a quorum.
Present.
You have a quorum.
All right. With the quorum established, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Now, according to the agenda, it would be public comment on items not on the agenda. Do you want to do this before the DCA update? Okay. So let's go to agenda item number 2, public comment on items not on the agenda. During the meeting today, public comment is welcome on any agenda item as the item is taken up by the board. Under the Open Meeting Act, the board may not take any action on issues raised by public comment that are not on the agenda, other than to decide whether to schedule that issue for a future meeting. In order to allow the board sufficient time to conduct its scheduled business, the board will limit time given to each person to 2 minutes. It's not necessary to repeat statements or views of a previous speaker. It's sufficient to state that you agree. As a reminder, please do not disclose details of active enforcement case or licensing matter, as this may compromise the board's ability to hear the case in the future. The board appreciates your cooperation and assistance in meeting its legal mandate. At this time, is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? Moderator, is there anyone requesting public comment?
Yes, we do have 2 raised hands. The first person is logged into WebEx as Sandra Perez. Sandra, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. And you're unmuted.
Good morning. My name is Sandra Perez, calling in from Hesperia, California, San Bernardino County. I'm calling because my daughter died as a result of medical negligence. She was 17 years old. And while I have multiple complaints in with the medical board, I have a handful in with the Osteopathic medical board, so I will not get into those details. However, I am concerned that the enforcement activity has been postponed to December quarterly meeting rather than discussed now, when your staff is not aware of the statute of limitations and how that applies to complaints involving minor children. My complaints were closed. I had to go back through the board to have them reopened, and the reason provided to me was because the staff was unaware of the statute of limitations. This is completely unacceptable with the public, because your expectation is the public is aware of the statute of limitations instead of your own agency, which is supposedly taking enforcement actions. I'd like to see this board do better. Thank you.
Our next request for comment comes from someone logged into WebEx as Michelle Montserrat Ramos. And Michelle, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone. And Michelle, you should have seen a pop-up that said unmute me. At the board's discretion, I can move to the next request for public comment.
I think so.
Thank you. Our next request for public comment comes from someone logged in as Monique Himes. Monique, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You're unmuted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Monique Himes. I'm from Bakersfield and I'm a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. These meetings are important to our family. We make a great effort to be here. Michelle told us 2 days ago that this meeting had been rescheduled for today. Today is my son Xavier's birthday and he's at work. He is still somehow working it out to be here and participate in this meeting. We take great efforts to work around our schedules to be here and to participate because the work your staff does can save lives. Our consumer complaints are not just controlled numbers or case numbers that may contain violations of a Medical Practice Act or a Business and Professions Code. These are people's lives that you are reviewing and deciding to investigate. This is important to us, and we expect this to be important to you. We need to have a community agreement here. Either you keep your meeting dates as originally scheduled, or if you have to reschedule, then you send out a meeting rescheduled email. You post an announcement where the public can find it on the homepage of your website, and you contact Consumer Watchdog because they will always keep us informed. Thank you.
And our next request, let's touch base again with Michelle Montserrat Ramos. I'm going to send you another request to unmute your microphone. And at the board's discretion, shall I move to the next request for comment?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Our next request comes from someone logged into WebEx as Tracy Dominguez. Tracy, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. And you're unmuted. We're not hearing your voice, though. You may be able to adjust your microphone setting. See, you muted yourself again. All right, you're unmuted. I'm afraid we're not hearing your voice.
Gosh, hello.
Yes, now we hear
Can you
you.
hear me? Okay,
Yes.
great. Hi, my name is Tracy Dominguez, and I am from Bakersfield, and I am a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog also. I was really disappointed when Michelle told me 2 days ago that you had rescheduled this meeting and moved it to August 18th today. I'm at the 10th today. We had 2 days notice and not from your board. We had heard the notice from Consumer Watchdog. I realize that you don't have any members in the public participating in these meetings, but we are here. We are not going anywhere. We are ready to participate because things need to change when it comes to your enforcement process. We lost our family, but we are ready to make changes here to save someone else's family. If you change a meeting date again, you need to alert the public. The way this was handled shows us that you are not interested in the public's participation. You can do better. Thank you.
And I can check back through with Michelle. I understand you're having audio issues. I'm going to send another request to unmute your microphone. It should be a pop-up on your web browser. And at this point, I can move on to the next request for public comment if you'd like, Board President.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Our next request for comment is from Xavier De Leon. Xavier, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You're unmuted.
Can you guys hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Hi, my name is Xavier De Leon. I'm from Bakersfield, and I'm a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. I'm rebuilding my life after extreme loss. I have 2 jobs, and I just caught up to Michelle's text yesterday that you moved the meeting from the 18th to today. I'm here today on my birthday participating from work, and I need you guys to make a commitment to the public that you welcome our participation and want to work with us. My hope is that you won't reschedule a meeting again, but if you must, you need to alert the public of the change. You need to post the meeting change on your homepage and send an email to Consumer Watchdog. Michelle is the one that's been keeping us informed. Thank you.
And I can circle back through with Michelle Monserrat Ramos one more time. And Michelle, there is a Q&A feature of WebEx. The directions are on the screen. You can look for the question mark icon in lower right corner of your screen and type the word comment, or type your comment directly in if you're having microphone issues. And at this point, it seems like Michelle is having technical issues, but that is the last comment request from the WebEx attendees.
Then we'll go ahead and close public comment. Thank you for your comments. Seeing that there is no additional comment, we will move on to the next agenda item. And we're going to go a little bit out of order and go ahead and do our DCA update.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? All right. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me an opportunity to provide the Department of Consumer Affairs update today. My name is Mary Kate Cruz-Jones, and I am providing this update on behalf of the Executive Office. First, I would like to welcome Member Kim as the newest addition of the Osteopathic Medical Board. Congratulations on your appointment, and thank you for your willingness to serve. The Governor signed Senate Bill 189 on June 30th, 2022, which reinstitutes through July 1, 2023, the remote meeting provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act that were in place during the pandemic. The changes took effect immediately upon signing. Please be aware that DCA wants you to have the right meeting for the business of the board or bureau while still taking into consideration both costs and public participation. We are asking boards to still track the cost for meetings, even when those that didn't involve travel or WebEx, as much as possible to allow the public to attend remotely, especially as COVID-19 numbers continue to rise. DCA is also asking boards to complete the public meeting survey to assist in tracking these costs for your board meetings in order to be able to compare costs for in-person and WebEx meetings, since this legislative change is only in place for this fiscal year. We have distributed the surveys to all boards and bureaus, and ask that they be completed within 30 days after each meeting held. Should you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to DCA. Though legislation has been passed allowing remote meetings, we are reminding boards that choose to hold in-person meetings of public safety measures, best practices, and recommendations for holding public meetings. When planning for upcoming meetings, please remember all board and bureau members and staff are expected to follow the state and local health public guidelines that apply to the area where meetings are held. Face coverings are strongly encouraged for all board members and staff at meetings. The Department of Public Health strongly recommends that individuals continue to mask in indoor settings. Please post face covering guidance signage at your meeting check-in or entrance. And regarding vaccination and testing, prior to the meeting in person or remote location, members need to submit vaccination verification to DCA's Office of Human Resources or be subject to COVID-19 testing. And being here in person, I just wanted to thank you all. We're checking off a lot of these boxes, so I super appreciate it. We are pleased to announce the inaugural report of the Enlighten Licensing Project is now available and was distributed to all boards and bureaus on Friday, May 13th. This innovative and collaborative project was started to streamline and enhance licensing processes by utilizing the knowledge and expertise of subject matter experts within DCA's boards and bureaus. The project was conducted in partnership with the Board of Registered Nursing. After a thorough assessment of some of BRN's licensing processes, the project's co-chairs provided recommendations to introduce new ideas and implement best practices for critical licensing activities. DCA held a brown bag event on June 1st to review the recommendations with all boards and bureaus, as we hope that other boards and bureaus can learn from the report and implement recommendations where applicable. We believe it is so important to learn from each other and share knowledge. We will be turning to enforcement next, and we will be reviewing the enforcement process at a board through this enlightenment process, utilizing enforcement subject matter experts. DCA also recently held a brown bag meeting with executive officers and bureau chiefs on July 5th to roll out changes to DCA's regulation development and approval process. These changes were also discussed and approved by DCA's executive officer and bureau chief cabinet. DCA shared documentation on the process and changes with all boards and bureaus. DCA is pleased to announce that Nicole Lay was hired on June 24th as the Deputy Director of DCA's Office of Administrative Services. With more than 20 years of state service experience, Nicole has dedicated 10 of those years to DCA. Most recently, she served as the Acting Deputy Director of the Office of Administrative Services, where she was responsible for overseeing business functions of Human Resources, Fiscal Operations, and Business Services Office. Prior to her role, Nicole was Chief of the DCA Office of Human Resources. She previously served at the Contractor State Licensing Board and the Department of Motor Vehicles. We are very excited to have her as a part of DCA's executive leadership team. And it's with great sadness that we announce that there are some transitions here at DCA, specifically regarding board and bureau relations. You'll notice I'm not Carrie Holmes. She was the Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations, and she left DCA on May 13th. Also, Brianna Miller, who you may have noticed, she may have given you DCA updates in the past. She accepted another position and left DCA on June 10th. DCA appreciates the support and service Brianna and Carrie have provided to all of our boards and bureaus. They have both been a huge asset to the department. And I'd like to assure you that during this time and transitional period, DCA Executive Office and Board and Bureau Relations would like to continue to ensure the continuity of services to all our boards and bureaus. So if you need anything, please let us know, and we'd be happy to help you. So call the office directly or send us an email. The department was recently advised by the State Controller's Office that there will be a delay in processing and the approval of travel expense claims until the end of July due to setting up the new fiscal year budget in the fiscal system. We appreciate your patience, and claims will be processed as quickly as they can once we are able to use the system again. And lastly, board members are required to complete the BMOT, or Board Member Orientation Training, within 1 year of appointment or reappointment. The final training of 2022 will be offered on October 12th. Members can register through DCA's Learning Management System, and BMOT is required for newly appointed and reappointed members, but also if anybody would like to join us, we'd love to have you. So as always, DCA is here to help, and this will conclude my update. I'll open if there's any questions from members now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We ask for public comment on that as well. Okay, if the moderator can open the floor to public comment on that agenda item.
Certainly. We've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. And the other option is you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon at the bottom part of your screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. Are there any requests for public comment on the DCA update? I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go back in the agenda to agenda item number 2, which, I'm sorry, 3, a review and possible approval of the minutes. So agenda item number 3, review and possible approval of the minutes from April 14th, 2022, the teleconference board meeting. Any discussion by the board? I just want to take a minute to thank Dr. Jensen for chairing that meeting when I was on a small vacation. Any discussion from members by the board on the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve.
Ms. Pines voted to motion to approve. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Mr. Adamian? So we have a second. It has been moved and seconded. Moderator, is there anyone requesting public comment on the minutes from April 14th, 2022?
Thank you. We're opening up the Q&A feature of WebEx. If you would like to make a comment on the minutes, you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment, and click send, or raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And I do not see any requests for comment on the minutes. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
And seeing no requests for comments, we'll move on. Machiko, can you please call a roll vote, please?
Dr. Buhari?
Yes.
Corey Damian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine? Yes. Motion is passed.
The motion is carried. The minutes were approved. The next item on the agenda, I think, is our budget update. Are we there? I missed something. Okay, so there was a petitioner. Give me a moment. Yeah, agenda item number 4, the petition for early termination of probation was canceled, and we'll go ahead and move to the next agenda item. The next agenda item is the budget update. Agenda item number 5, the budget update. Renee Milano, DCA Budget Manager, and Bill Lloyd, DCA Budget Analyst.
This is the moderator, Bill Lloyd. You should be able to unmute your microphone at will now.
Good morning.
Thank you.
With me today is actually Karen Munoz, the other budget manager. Renee was not available for today. So again, my name is Bill Lloyd, and I'm a budget analyst with the DCA Budget Office. And with me today, as I just mentioned, Karen Munoz, one of our budget office managers. First off, we would like to thank the board and the executive staff for allowing us a few minutes to present the board's budget report made up from the fund condition statement and the revenue and expenditure projections in your packet. After my remarks, we'll be happy to answer your questions. Please refer to item Agenda 5 in your packet. These documents are what I will be referencing today. They provide substantial information on the board's budget, both revenue and expenditures, and the projected fund balance into the future. At the end of June each year, the legislature approves the budget bill, which upon the governor's signature becomes the Budget Act. This year, Chapter 43, Senate Bill 154, is the Budget Act and details the state's spending for the upcoming fiscal year of 2022 to 23. For this fiscal year, the Budget Act authorizes the Osteopathic Medical Board $3.25 million in expenditures and anticipates $3.1 million in revenues. Page 2 of your document is the fund condition. Just please note, as of this meeting, the data we will be presenting is the budget year 21-22 fiscal month 11. The Budget Office will update the board's executive staff with new data as soon as it becomes available. The second column on the fund condition is referred to as past year, or PY, and that's the year that just ended. The board began 21-22 with an adjusted beginning balance of close to $5.1 million, and is projected to receive $2.9 million in revenues and expend about $3.7 million. The board will end 21-22 with a projected revenue balance of $4.2 million. You will also see there are 14.5 months in reserve at the bottom of the column PY. Months in reserve refers to how long the board can go and operate normally without any incoming revenues. A healthy board is considered to have a fund in reserve that can account for 6 to 12 months of operational expense. The reserve balance now becomes the starting balance of the next fiscal year, or CY, current year, 22-23. And this displays the Budget Act of 22 that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, as I just mentioned. You can find specific line item category details for revenues and expenditures for year 21-22 on pages 1 and 3 in the item 5 documents. The Budget Office will continue to monitor board's revenues and expenditures and report back to the board's executive staff with monthly projections as future fiscal months data becomes available. A few things to note: the fund condition is a snapshot in time, and thus only captures a reflection of the data used in its creation. And current year revenues and expenditures may change as actual returns become available. In out years, the column BY and beyond, revenues are held constant while expenditures are increased at 3% per year to account for general salary increases as well as employee compensation, retirement rate adjustments, and other statewide obligations. Future year months in reserve go down due to the revenue being held constant and the expenditures assumed to be fully expended plus 3%, as I just mentioned. The fund condition does not include unanticipated increased enforcement expenditures, which may include higher than normal caseload and increased cost of investigations. Additional enforcement costs and other unforeseen expenditures could create pressure on the board's fund in out years. And last, we would like to note that any future legislation or unanticipated events could result in the board's need for additional resources. The Budget Office will continue to monitor the board's fund condition statement and keep the line of communication with the board's executive staff open. And this concludes my remarks for today. And again, we'd like to thank the board members and executive staff for inviting us here, and we'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any discussion from board members? We can go ahead and now entertain comments from the public with regard to the budget update. Moderator, are there any persons requesting public comment?
If anyone would like to make a public comment on the budget presentation, you can look for the WebEx Q&A icon, a question mark inside a box at the lower right corner of your computer screen, or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device, or you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And I do not see any requests for public comment on the budget presentation. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right. That was agenda item number 5. Number 6 is what we moved out of position and did early. So we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is the Executive Director's Report. Agenda item number 7, Mr. Ito.
Thank you, Dr. Bahari. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So I'm Mark Ito. I'm the Executive Director of the Osteopathic Medical Board. I'm excited to present my Executive Director's Report today. I'll be going over licensing, staffing, regulations update, COVID-19, and then I will pass the report over to Corey Sparks to give the enforcement portion of the report. So starting with licensing, our population continues to grow. At this point, we're at 15,740. This number shows that we have a sustained increased interest in the profession. Just to kind of put it into perspective, our population when I started back in 2019 was 10,932. So this represents a 44% increase in licensee population. Some of that is due to the new postgraduate training license that did increase our population, but you know that's really 1,000 or so licensees. So we are increasing. That is something that we've made a point to do outreach and just to make sure that interest in our profession continues to grow. So just going over the numbers for our full unrestricted licenses, we currently have 13,205 under our jurisdiction. Now that includes licenses that are current, licenses that are delinquent that are still able to renew, inactive licenses, and the such. So we have a total of 13,205 under our jurisdiction at this time. For our postgraduate training licenses, we have 1,353. So the postgraduate training license that was put into, that was implemented back in January 1st, 2000, I believe. And the postgraduate training license is a license that the doctors have to get after graduating medical school and have to obtain within 180 days of starting their residency. And the last, it's actually a permit type, is our fictitious name permits. We currently have 1,182 in California, and that's where we get our grand total of 15,740. Like I said earlier, our licensed population continues to grow. I will say not at the rate that it was in fiscal year 1920 and 2021, but we are still growing incrementally. So moving on in licensing, so the table below shows our licensing workload for fiscal years 2021 and 2022. So I will say for our full unrestricted licenses in 2021, we received 699, and in 2021-22, we received 1,229. So that's a significant increase. That's 76% increase in applications. Some of that is due in part to legislation, Senate Bill 806. So I'll give a brief history of kind of our licensing changes over the last few years. Is we had a change when I first started in 2019. It was Senate Bill 798 at the time. The licensing requirements prior to that were you could get your full unrestricted license after your first year of residency, and you had to get it before your third year. So SB 798 back in 2000, it required, it implemented that postgraduate training license I spoke of earlier. So you'd have to obtain that, but you weren't eligible for your full unrestricted license until 36 months of postgraduate training. So that was the original change. So this new change we have, which is SB 806, that was implemented at the beginning of this calendar year, the postgraduate training license is pretty much unchanged, but doctors were eligible for their full unrestricted license after 12 months of residency. And the other part of that bill was at the doctor's first renewal, they have to demonstrate compliance that they have completed 36 months of residency, and that's the safeguard in place to ensure that folks do complete their postgraduate training. So getting back to this increased number, I do think our numbers will increase, but the reason why this number increased so significantly was because that licensing change made a lot more folks eligible right away, right? Because with SB 798, you had to wait till you had 36 months. And with this new bill, you're eligible at 12 months. So a lot of folks that were in PGY 2 and PGY 3, their second and third year residency, were all of a sudden eligible. And we received a lot more applications. So that was that increase. So kind of moving down that chart, we approved 1,108, and we received 554. So that was actually a 100% increase on the dot. And that's because there was some carryover applications from the year before we processed, coupled with the fact that we received 76% more was that increase. And we issued 66% more licenses than we did the previous fiscal year. So a lot of that increase has to do with that legislation, but I do think our numbers will increase, just not at that rate. So our PTL applications received, we got 560 in fiscal year 21-22, whereas we received 587 in the previous fiscal year. So that's a small percentage less, but it's pretty consistent where it's going to be. And we approved 563 in 21-22. We renewed 4,875 licenses in fiscal year 21-22, which is less than the previous fiscal year. But that's consistent with how we trend. Every fiscal year that ends in an odd number has more than the ones that expire in an even number. So we kind of yo-yo up and down with our renewal numbers every other year. Fictitious name permits, we received 144. That's consistent with what we have been receiving. We approved 102, and we renewed 703. So our FMP numbers stay fairly consistent. I will say, we do have, and I'll kind of talk about it later in my report, we do have staff vacancies, and with this increased number of applications, staff have done a great job with being redirected from their units to kind of ensure that these licenses are issued. I have an enforcement analyst, Robin, who's kind of spearheaded this licensing backlog project. And I will say just about everyone in the office has volunteered to step in and kind of make sure that our applications are processed in a timely fashion. So I will say my staff has been awesome in that aspect. So moving on, we have our automated fingerprint process that we implemented in January of 2022. We transitioned to that. It's been an awesome transition. Previously, unless you're doing live scan fingerprints, applicants were sending us hard card fingerprints that we were having to cashier. We were having to send over to the Department of Justice ourselves in a transmittal. So that was an increased workload on our end. So this process, it changed where the applicants are sending their fingerprints directly to the Department of Justice, which cut out that part of the workload for the board. And additionally, when we get the results, we used to kind of get them, and Machiko was our liaison with DOJ. She'd have to print out those results, kind of log them into a spreadsheet, and it was a significant workload for us. So this process has changed where when we get those results, we have an interface between Breeze and the Department of Justice where those results automatically get entered into that person's application file without any manual entry. And in the background, DCA OIS has been great. They have it set up where if those results come in and there's no application for it to match, it continuously searches every single night until that application shows up. So it's a significant workload decrease on the board's end, and I think it's increasing consumer satisfaction, and that it's taking a much shorter time for those fingerprints to be processed. With all those great things, I will say there have been some hurdles, and figuring out how to match, unmatched documents and everything else, but we're kind of getting to the bottom of that and getting really dialed in as a board. And I will give kudos to Terry Thorpenson, my assistant executive director. She's the one who kind of spearheaded this with DCA OIS, who's also been awesome in this process to kind of get this implemented and kind of change our technologically changes for the better. So I wanted to make sure I gave kudos to those folks as well. So moving on to the next section, which is staffing. We currently have 13.9 authorized positions. We have 3.5 current vacancies. One of the vacancies is our office technician typing position. So we used to have a internal cashier at the board. In October of 2021, we transitioned to sending all of our payments over to the department central cashiering unit to process our payments. So that's been more efficient on our end and a workload decrease, and the department's been great with communication, working with the board on all those payments. So what this did is it allowed the board to dissolve its cashiering unit and redirect those resources to, in the report I say other mission critical areas, but really it's to help out that increasing licensing workload is kind of what the plan is, on top of being the board's front desk receptionist. We do need to admittedly improve in terms of our communication, and I think that's something that's a big step forward. So the board, we did advertise this. We were unsuccessful in filling the position last fiscal year, but it's been re-advertised. We actually have interviews scheduled for next week, so I'm hoping to have this position filled end of August, beginning of September at some point. So the next vacancy is our medical consultant position. We're in the process of advertising it. It should go up probably in the next week or so. So the medical consultant, it provides medical expertise in the review of medical investigations and evaluates the professional conduct of licensees in relation to their scope of practice. So this is an important position for the board. Enforcement is, our mandate is to protect the public, and I think enforcement is a very large part of that. I think this position needs to be filled ASAP. There's not a work stoppage at this point. At the moment, we're using experts to look at these cases in lieu of hiring the staff. But I think in terms of efficiency, I think this is a position we need to get filled ASAP, and it should be up and advertised within the next week or so. The next position that's vacant is our staff services analyst in licensing. This position became vacant on June 1st. This position is is pretty much our lead in licensing in terms of application processing. It approves DO applications. And then this position also assists Terry, because Terry is our point of contact with Breeze, but this position is going to assist with Breeze maintenance and testing and outreach and website management. This is our next position after the medical consultant in terms of priority that we're going to advertise, and we're hoping to get this advertised hopefully within the next month or so. I say end of the calendar year, but I want to push this one forward only because of our increasing licensing workload. And the last position is a half-time staff services analyst in licensing. So we were approved this position through a legislative budget change proposal due to Senate Bill 806. So as I mentioned earlier, part of Senate Bill 806 is that these new licensees have to demonstrate compliance, that they've completed the 36 months of residency at the time of their first renewal. So this staff member, for every application that's licensed, has to go in, has to put in an appropriate, what's called a modifier within the computer system, which is Breeze, which is going to let the board know whether they have to demonstrate that compliance, whether they've, because some folks already have 36 months, whether that's going to be at the first renewal, the second renewal. So there's a lot of manual workload that goes along with that. And this staff is going to have to do that, and then on the back end have to validate that these licensees have demonstrated that compliance. So this is a half-time position. This one is, we need to fill this one as well, and I'm guessing by the end of this calendar year, we'll advertise and have it filled. So moving on to regulations. So we have three regulation packages that are in our purview. The first one is the continuing medical education and audit regulation package that we've been working on. This package was submitted to DCA for pre-review on May 25th, 2022. I'm actually currently working with the DCA Legal Regulations Unit on this package. Our reg attorney has been great. Her name's Gina. She's been working with me. We anticipate getting this done at some point. I'm hoping early next calendar year, this will be great for the board. The next regulation package is the disciplinary guidelines. This regulation package will improve the overall disciplinary guidelines with more detail, model language, and disciplinary recommendations. It is in the final stages of drafting, which includes reviewing the revised version of the informational digest and the initial statement of reasons. Terry Thorfinson, the board's assistant executive director, has been working on this. This is a very extensive and detailed package that I anticipate will be sent over to DCA within the next month or two, hopefully. So the last regulation package we're working on is the citable offenses. This package, it updates the citation authority to enforce existing statutes and regulations. Adding these offenses will strengthen the board's overall enforcement capabilities. The main I don't want to say the main, there's a lot of citable offenses that are being amended in here, but the big one is the board currently doesn't have the authority to cite someone for not responding to an inquiry. And I think that is something that we need to have the authority to do, and that's what this regulation package is going to kind of hammer home. And that's important when it comes to, an enforcement case. We could still send it on to investigations, but in terms of gathering the information in an efficient manner, like that'd be a great aspect to have in terms of citations. So COVID-19. So COVID-19. Let me start by saying the department's been great in terms of assisting the boards with COVID-19. So any state employee, and this is effective September 23rd, 2021, who does not verify that they're fully vaccinated for COVID-19 has to get tested weekly. And I will say that the DCA executive office has been fantastic. Every board has to every week let them know who needs to test, and then they do a fantastic job of testing, letting us know. I'm sure the work over there has been extensive, and the board's very appreciative of that. So during the early stages of the pandemic, in terms of telework for the board, it's kind of an evolving thing for the board. So when COVID and the pandemic first started, I require staff to intermittently report to the office while maintaining the appropriate social distancing guidelines, which amounted to staff coming in. There was a schedule, and it amounted to 2 to 3 days per week. So currently, I have staff coming into the office 3 to 5 days per week, depending on the nature of their workload. Some staff come in 3 days a week, and some staff have to come in 5, just kind of depending on their workload, and because we have to factor in, what work can staff actually bring home and what's confidential, and so some staff have to come in every single day. So increasing the number of staff in the office recently, I did that to ensure that there's office coverage, which is another issue that needs to be. I don't want to say issue, but office coverage is vital. We got to make sure the office is open and that there's coverage by staff, and also important that operational needs are met. So SB 189 was signed by the governor on June 30th, 2022, and it took effect immediately. So the bill, it reinstituted through July 1st of next calendar year the remote meeting provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act that were in place during the pandemic, which kind of allowed us to, which allows us to meet in person or meet remotely, depending on the convenience and what business needs to be done as well. The bill gives the board the flexibility to meet remotely without disclosing physical locations. Now, this is a temporary solution, and I think we're all in agreement that it'd be great if a permanent solution was put in place to kind of give us the flexibility to meet in person if we need to, but at the same time, if board business needs to get done kind of in a pinch, we can meet remotely and get that done as well. So that concludes my portion of the report. I will have Corey Sparks come up and give the enforcement portion of the report as well. But before Corey presents his portion, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I just want to go back to two areas of licensing that seem of concern. So the delinquent licenses and then the delinquent licensee fictional name permits. Those delinquencies seem to be high relative to the amount in licensees, so like 13% to our active, and then the other number is more than half. I mean, do we have, like, is there a plan for, I don't know, going after people who are not renewing their license? Are they still practicing? Is there a timeline of which you can be delinquent and then your license is absolutely inactive? Did I ask too many questions?
No. So your question is for our delinquent licenses, why they've increased? Is that and then what are we doing to kind of figure out the root of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the increase seems particularly significant given the increase from of active to active. But even with that, just kind of like what are we doing? How long can a license be delinquent before we say your license is not an active license no more, you should not be practicing?
Okay. So I'd have to go back and look, kind of see how we're trending with the delinquent licenses, because it's out of the board's control if someone decides not to renew their license. That can come down to several factors. They could be moving out of state, they could retire. So let me go back and kind of see where we've been trending over the last few fiscal years. Okay. So because I show 1,540, I'd have to look to see where we were at last fiscal year or the fiscal year before that to kind of determine if we are trending toward more delinquent licenses. Just off the top of my head, it could be attributed to COVID. It could be a lot of things. But in terms of protecting the public, I'd have to kind of see why that's happening, if more folks are deciding to retire or where we're trending. So I will definitely get back to you next board meeting with why that's happening. Because
would the retirement be an inactive? That's what I would think.
It could be.
Okay.
Some folks take pride in holding on to their license even when they retire, so they'll go inactive instead of letting it go delinquent.
Okay.
Because folks can renew their license, and Machiko can correct me, I believe 5 years after their license expires? Yeah, so up to 5 years after their license expires, they can renew their license.
Okay.
So this delinquent number could be anyone who expired at the end of last month to going back 5 years.
So then what is inactive? What's the definition for inactive?
So inactive is someone who renews their license but renews inactive and is not required to do any of their continuing education. But if they were to become active, they'd have to pay a difference in fees and do their continuing education to become current again.
So they can't practice medicine during that period of time.
With an inactive license, yeah.
Okay.
Can a delinquent be practicing currently?
No. A delinquent license does not have a current license. Their license is expired and practice is prohibited.
So could we send letters to these people saying your license is inactive?
Well, they choose to become inactive, so they actually have an inactive license. They've requested that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so delinquent means they've requested, not that we're trying to go collect money for licensing
No,
fees.
delinquent just means that their license expired, but it's not past that 5-year threshold for it to be canceled.
Got it,
But
okay.
during that period of time, they cannot practice in the state of California.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not
Okay,
licensed.
perfect, okay.
Yeah.
Any more comment from the board on, or board members on Mr. Ito's presentation? Okay, we'll move on to Corey Sparks and the enforcement portion of this report.
Thank you, Dr. Bahari. Good morning, board members. I hope we're all doing well today, and it's good to see you all. This portion of the enforcement report covers all activity during the last fiscal year. So this is this report's based off of all data coming into our BREEZE system. We collect that and we extract that using a database system called Cognos. So this is the data that we have during that period. So for complaint intake, for table number 1, we can see that during this period that the board received 656 complaints. And of those, during this period of time, we referred 735 of those. We assigned those, referred those out to investigation. The aging during this period, the average days from the receipt date to the date of assignment was 14 days. And we can see back in July, we were up around 53, and our intake has really, really done well in decreasing that aging number. Right now, we're averaging, around 14. So, and I can only anticipate that continuing, getting better. So, pending at the end of June, we had 19 cases, and our 805 reports during this period received six 805 reports. In figure 1.1 in the middle, we can see that our levels are really averaging out or leveling out for the most part across during our intake period. What this means is that the analysts are really, once they get those cases, they're processing them immediately and getting them out of the intake and over into investigations. And we can see that especially with the pending level is around 10 cases per month. So that just really means that they're really getting to these cases and getting them out to investigation. There may be, Mark touched on the fact that our analysts are helping out in the licensing area. So next quarter, we may see a little bump up in this because they've been, taking on other responsibilities. So that number may increase a little bit, but I don't anticipate a lot. And in the chart at the below, as you can see, our monthly averaging for our intake, which continues to increase. Okay, next page, for all cases that were referred to desk investigation, this is all internal investigation, we assigned 734 cases. We completed 729 cases. The average days to complete an internal desk investigation was 132 days. And at the end of June, we had 320 cases pending. So what we can see in our figure 2.1, desk investigation monthly totals, pending, our pending cases averaging around between 300 and 350 per month. And our assigned cases and our completed cases, that's around 50 per month. So again, we can see consistency across the board monthly from our intake analyst, our desk analyst, which is good. I think that's a really good sign. For cases that were sent out to the field, bottom of page 2, table 3, we referred 32 cases to field investigations. Field investigations completed 52 cases, and the average days to complete a field investigation was 551 days. At the end of June, we had 46 cases pending out in the field. Turning to page 3, figure 3.1, on the top of the page, we can see the breakout of the types of cases that were completed by the field investigations. Now, when cases go out to the field, these are more serious cases. These are cases that need a sworn investigator to look at. So as we can see, 21% of those cases that were completed were prescribing cases. 14% were unprofessional conduct or some form of fraud. 8% were sexual misconduct. 13% were criminal. Typically, those are DUI cases. 15% was some form of neglect or injury. 10% were substance abuse or impairment. 15% was an unlicensed practice, and 4% were hospital 805s. Hospital 805s are disciplinary actions taken by a hospital that are they're required, the hospital required to send us that 805 report for us to review as well. One thing to note on this chart is that we had a really uptick in unlicensed practicing. There was probably about, I would say 4 or 5, how much was in there that I say unlicensed in here? I think there was, 8. There were 8 cases that were out during this period for unlicensed practice. And that's because there's been somewhat of an increase in California from individuals who get how can you say, they get training overseas in osteopathic manipulation, and they don't have a DO degree, but they have some kind of degree from Europe, usually UK or something like that. So they come over here and they set up practice and they start providing manipulation. And that's when we get complaints from individuals saying, hey, this individual's practicing medicine, or he's advertising he's a doctor, and so we send out an investigator to confirm, or what. Most of the time there's not. Most of the time they're not practicing medicine, but it's a very kind of fine line of what they're doing. So that's typically what those unlicensed practices are, make up. So the aging for our field investigations, we can look at 340 cases were completed within 90 days. I'm sorry, this is aging for all investigations, both desk and field. So 340 cases were completed within 90 days. 122 cases were completed between 91 and 180 days, almost within 6 months. 130 cases were completed between 6 months and 1 year. 70 cases were completed between 1 year and 2 years, and 29 cases were completed between 2 years and 3 years. So as you can see that the majority of our cases are completed within 6 months to a year, which is good. I think in that pie chart below, we can see the breakout, the aging matrix for all the investigations. But at the bottom there, we can see that, where am I at? That 462, 67% investigations were completed within 6 months. That's 67%. And 86% were completed within a year. So that's a good number. I think it's a healthy number. So turning to page 4, enforcement actions. These are cases that we've sent out to the Attorney General's office. During this period, we referred 33 cases to the Attorney General. 22 cases were accusations. There were actually no statement of issues filed during this time. So there were 12 final disciplinary orders. We had 1 accusation withdrawn. We had 5 cases that were closed without disciplinary action. And we had 3 cases that were citable. We cited them. And we had 4 cases that we had ISO or PC-23, which is an interim suspension order, or PC-23 is like it's a suspension. PC-23 is typically where someone does a crime, commits a crime, and we go before the judge. We send an attorney to the judge, and they say, hey, we believe that this individual is a danger to the public, and the judge agrees to that and issues a suspension on that license. At the end of June, we had 35 cases pending at the Attorney General's office. So in the middle chart, what we see is the breakout, the aging for all of the final disciplinary orders during this period. We had 12 So as you can see, 3 cases were completed within 91 and 180 days. 1 case was completed between 181 and 1 year. 2 cases were completed within 3 years, 2 to 3 years. 6 cases were completed between 3 to 4 years. And we can see the breakout of that below in terms of the percentages. And looking on page 5, we can look on figure 6.2. This is the disciplinary outcomes, the types of cases that resulted in our disciplinary actions. So we had 2 probation cases. We had 1 case that was a probation with suspension. We had 2 revocations. We had 4 surrenders. We had 3 reprimands, 1 pre-PLR, and 2 subsequent disciplines. Now, pre-PLR, that is where an individual decides to agree to a public letter of reprimand without going to the Attorney General's office. So that saves the board money. So that's a good situation. The subsequent discipline cases, those are when someone who's on probation, and we do an additional discipline on them. In this case, we had 1 person surrender their license. They had been on probation for quite a long time. They were tolling their probation, so they surrendered it. The other individual, we did a cease and desist order. They had not complied to any terms of their license, the probation terms and conditions, so we issued a cease and desist. Turning to probation, as of 7/25/22, there were 32 probation cases, 2 compliance monitoring cases, of which 9 cases are told. During the last 12 months, 9 probationary cases were completed and 2 cases were opened. For all current probation cases, the total cost recovery ordered is $468,000, a little over $468,000. The board recovered almost $250,000, leaving a balance of almost $290,000. So that $220,000. So that's where we're at in terms of our cost recovery. So, and also I just wanted to add that the board during up on the next board hearing, Mark and I had discussed having a presentation of the process, the enforcement process. I know that somebody has asked about what's that look like, and so I do believe we can get some good visual aids as well to show how that process works and to explain it. So, but there's not, at this level we can't disclose really the details of complaints. We can just give you. I know we've had some public members ask about details, and we can only provide really data, and we can't get into details of investigations. So, any questions?
So just real quick, yeah. So as far as that presentation goes, I think it was basically from the public standpoint, what's the process,
right? And
from the time they log the case, how does a case make it through all the way till closure?
Right.
That was kind of what we wanted to see in
right.
Sort of from the perspective of the public.
Yeah, I think there's a somewhat of in terms of the public's perspective of how it works. I think the expectation is it would go a lot faster, and they would see the kinds of results they want. And I can understand that. I can understand that perception perspective, but that's not always the case. The doctors are under due process like anybody else. They have a right to, to address any complaints that come their way, and we have to have all of our, all of the facts. We have to really do due diligence, and that can take time. It can take real time. So, and it's also critical we have, for the board to do enforcement, the bread and butter of the board is the medical consultant and the experts, because we aren't doctors. I'm not a doctor. Mark is not a doctor. We can't look at those medical records and make that determination. So it's, you know, a lot of these cases come down to, you know, having that expert look at that case and determine if there was a departure in the standard of care. Yeah.
Any questions from board members? Ms. Pines?
I'm just going to piggyback off of what you just said, that the fact that we're looking for a medical consultant, do we have time delays because we have to go and get an expert because we don't have one on staff?
Well, we have experts. We have plenty of experts.
Okay.
We just don't have a medical consultant. And the difference is that the consultant is hired by the board.
Right.
And so and the staff have access to the consultant immediately. Like we have a case we don't understand, and so the consultant, we can go, hey, and the consultant can give us some advice on that case. And then once, and really the statute talks about before we can even send quality of care cases out to the field, it has to be reviewed by the consultant or an expert. So we have to have their eyes on there to give us, you know, direction, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not really having a delay, even though we're missing that critical person.
Pardon me?
We're not having a delay because we're missing that critical.
No.
Okay.
Well, no. You know, because they're the serious. So at this point, the staff are looking at the serious cases and saying, hey, we got to get this out. So we go to the expert and we get those cases looked at. You know, I think there are some cases that we can't hold off a little bit till we get that, but the real important ones we're sifting through and saying we're processing those as much as we can. Okay. Yeah.
I also think the staff is doing a really good job on the complaint intake, so I want to definitely congratulate you guys on that, and hopefully we keep that number at 14. You know, between 10 and 14, I think is really, really good, and
it's really
we're
good.
looking good. We're looking good in that area, and I know once we kind of have our license vacancies filled, that will continue that momentum. On those cases that are in that 2 to 3 or 4 year range, which was about 6, can you just tell us, like, what's creating that length of delay on those cases?
Those cases.
And I know they're, like, right here in your mind because they've been aging.
Those cases are typically prescription issues. And those cases typically take, or there could be criminal issues. So those could, usually with a criminal issue, a lot of times we have to kind of sit on that case and allow like another department or another, you know, agency do the case because it's criminal. The EA might be involved or such. So we kind of have to sit on that case. The prescription cases take quite a while, and the reason is because once it goes out to the field, and I try to like when the case comes to me to send out, if it's a prescription case, I try to alleviate some of the field investigation work by doing a lot of the cures work. So like our consultant will say, hey, there's these 10 patients here that look really off the chart in terms of the cures report. So I'll run cures on all those patients as well and send that out. But see, here's what happens is when it gets to the field, that investigator has to contact, usually they'll get, I tell them, just get 5 of those patients that you guys see that are the worst. And they have a medical consultant in the field too. So they're kind of operating with a doctor too. And they'll get the 5 of those, but they have to contact each one of those individuals to get compliance, consent, to say, hey, we have a complaint against this doctor. Would you be willing to consent to us looking at your medical records and for this issue? So that itself can take 6 months to a year to get people to comply. And if they don't comply, then they have to subpoena the records. And if they don't, if they say no, we don't want our records at all, then the next, and we feel like we really need them, we have to do an enforcement subpoena, which is not, that doesn't happen a lot, but that's another added cost, and because you have to go to a judge and get approval to get those records. So those cases really take up a lot of time.
Okay.
A lot of time, yeah.
Okay. That's it for my questions.
Okay, thanks.
Just a comment to support what Corey was saying. Before my appointment, I was expert witness for the board, and the prescription cases are what the majority of the work that was given to us, and it is a lot of data. So especially if there are multiple patients, there could be almost thousands of pages of documents that we have to read line by line to provide an expert opinion on. So those cases do require quite a bit of work. There's lots of moving parts because once it goes to the expert, then it what do we get, Corey? Like 90 days? I forget. But to submit a report. And these experts, like myself, were oftentimes working full time, and we're kind of doing this on the side. So, not to make excuses about why it takes a long time, but I'm just kind of reiterating from firsthand experience that it can take a long time. So, because we want to do a good job, you know. So.
Right. I think I'd rather err on taking the right time to get the case right and done, get the facts right, get the interviews right, and then because if we rush it and send it to the AG's office, they'll and they find something wrong with it, they'll kick it back to us, and we've had cases kicked back to us because either the evidence wasn't strong enough or the expert report wasn't strong enough. And so I'd rather get it right done early so we don't get those issues. So,
Mr. Ito, you had a comment?
Hi, this is Mark Ito. I just wanted to thank you, Denise, for acknowledging those intake numbers. But I will say that the intake is the one mandate in law for the board that we have to actually open and acknowledge those cases within 10 days.
Yeah.
And if you look back in July, we were at 53, and then we made a really strong push to get that at 10 or under. We were at that 14 number in May, and even though it's only 4 days over, I kind of just wanted to explain that in large part was due to my enforcement staff redirecting their time to assist with the licensing backlog. So I'm really proud of my staff for getting that done, and thank you for acknowledging that.
They're doing good, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead. If there's no objection, can we take a quick 5-minute break before going to the next agenda item? Oh, I'm sorry. Public comment on the Executive Director's report with regards to Mr. Ito's report or the enforcement portion.
Thank you. We've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. You can look for the question mark icon in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options. Type the word comment and click send. Your other option is to click on the raise hand button. We do have some raised hands. Let's see, we will check in with someone logged into WebEx as Monique Himes. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am Monique Himes. I am from Bakersfield and a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. Out of the 805 reports that you reported on the complaint intake section on your enforcement report shows that you received 6 805 reports. I'm going to repeat that, 6. Yet it states in figure 3.1 you completed field investigations show that only 2, I'm going to say that again, 2 of the 6 hospital 805 reports were investigated. What would warrant 4 805 reports to not be investigated? With the 2 805 reports that were investigated, were they posted on the physician's profile under 805 report, under hospital discipline? Thank you.
Shall I move on to the next public comment?
Yes, please.
All right. Next public comment from someone logged into WebEx as Sandra Perez. Sandra, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, this is Sandra Perez, Hesperia, California, and I'm going over this Ombc enforcement report and how abysmal it is. You guys are completing approximately 5% disciplinary action of complaints received according to these numbers, which is just as abysmal as the medical board presents in their 4%. I don't know that that's necessarily a correct figure, but that's the perception that's being portrayed by your own reporting. There are a number of questions and concerns I have with the overall reporting that there's just sufficiently not enough time. So What I will focus on is a comment made by Mr. Sparks that, and I want to confirm that I'm hearing that this board has no medical consultant at all whatsoever, but a medical consultant step is required for quality of care complaints. How many quality of care complaints are currently being held because there is no medical consultant with this board? Why is there no medical consultant? What are you doing to resolve the situation of no medical consultant? There was also a comment that when necessary, you're bypassing straight to an expert. What is the determining factors for that when necessary? What is when necessary? What's the definition of that? You know, this information is, like I said, abysmal at best. And, you know, the best I can do is offer some input. Mr. Sparks, I will send you emails directly with my input in the matter. It is not anything that would impact any privacy issues of any complaints or any providers or physicians. One of the other questions, just to end with, are these business days or calendar days in your reporting? Thank you.
And our next request for comment is someone logged into WebEx as Tracy Dominguez. Tracy, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Tracy Dominguez, and I am from Bakersfield and a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. We have learned that your board staff is not following the rules, all the rules. We have been following all the rules. There have been a couple of minor children's complaints that your board staff has tried to dismiss due to the statute of limitations have passed. Consumer Watchdog questioned your staff's actions. One was overturned and one was not closed, but another child was questioned. The rules state that there is an expectation of statute of limitations for minor children, and those statutes of limitations are open until they reach the age of 18 years old. I feel that you count on the public not knowing these rules. It is my concern, and there are many other minor children's complaints that have been closed because enforcement staff is not, and I'm going to repeat it, not following these rules. This needs to be discussed, and maybe staff needs to be educated on the rules. Thank you.
And our next request for public comment is from someone logged into WebEx as Xavier De Leon. Xavier, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You're unmuted.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Xavier De Leon, and I am from Bakersfield, with a volunteer from Consumer Watchdog. At the April quarterly board meeting, Vice President Jensen asked for the enforcement process to be discussed at the next board meeting. It is my understanding that the enforcement process agenda item has been moved to the December quarterly board meeting. Make sure that the enforcement process discussion does make it into the next meeting agenda. We have a lot of concerns and have learned of rules that the board staff are not following that need to be addressed and fixed. I will be there for the December meeting and will be ready to participate in that presentation. One of my concerns is that the board staff is not following the rules regarding the exception of the statute of limitations when it comes to consumer complaints filed. When it comes to complaints filed on is open until we've had a For My Baby's case to be accepted, and I want to make that the staff knows this case to the
And I see no additional raised hands and no requests for comment in the Q&A. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else would like to comment? No? So we'll move on. Mark, is it okay if we take a quick break before going to the pending legislation, because we have a lot of stuff to talk about? All right? We'll take a quick 5-minute break. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to hold on agenda item 8 for a second. We're going to go back to agenda item 2, public comment. There was a member of the public who wished to have comment but had technical difficulties, so we have a copy of her statement. We're going to read her statement into the record so it makes it into the minutes. That's Ms. Michelle Montserrat.
Okay. It says, good morning, board members. I am Michelle Montserrat Ramos. I am the Kathy Olson patient advocate with Consumer Watchdog. I am a state and national advocate that has been working for greater transparency and accountability with the Ombc for 17 years. I am responsible for the initiation of SB 1441, the Uniform Standards for Substance Abusing Healthcare Professionals in the state. I lobbied for SB 1448, the Patient's Right to Know Act, for 2 years. I now work with the advocates across the state of California on medical negligence issues, and I help them navigate through your complex and consumer-unfriendly enforcement process. After monitoring the Medical Board of California for many years, I've just started monitoring this board this year, along with a few of my advocate families. I was shocked to find out that the date of this meeting had been changed without any warning. I came across the date change when I checked the meeting materials on Monday, 2 days ago. Had I not checked the meeting materials earlier, we might have missed this meeting, and maybe that is what you wanted. Maybe you didn't want public participation at your quarterly meeting. As a subscriber, I have received your meeting agenda 6 to 7 days before your previously scheduled quarterly meetings. I have yet to receive the agenda by email for this meeting. In years of monitoring the Ombc, they have never moved up a meeting without notice. They moved meeting locations months before with a discussion during a public board meeting, but they have never done anything like this. You may not want members of the public to participate in your meetings, but you need to understand members of the public took time off from work and worked around their work schedules to attend this meeting on August 18th. Members of the public are filing complaints with this board. They can see how your enforcement process is not working for consumers, and they are not happy, so they are attending these meetings. You either need to keep your scheduled meetings that you plan for months in advance, or you need to send out an email to your subscribers warning the public of the change in meeting dates. Obviously, there aren't that many of us here at your meetings. Recently, I have talked to 2 members of the executive staff. Someone could have given the public some warning of the meeting date change. We are not getting off to a good start here. There are meeting notification laws to follow. We can do better. Thank you. Michelle Montserrat Ramos.
Thank you. And having that read into the minutes now, we'll go ahead and move to agenda item number 8, and that is discussion of possible action pending legislation. Agenda item number 8, discussion of possible action on pending legislation. Terry Thorpenson.
Whoops, there we go. That's good? Okay. Okay, this is our list of bills. As we promised, this would be the opportunity for board members to look at these bills, see if there's policies that you want to take a position for or against the bills. And this is a time, unlike maybe other agendas where we're kind of rushed at the end of the meeting, we have plenty of time to talk about the policies that are being raised by this legislation. So I'm going to go through each of the bills. If you'll note, for ease, if you wanted to follow along in the agenda, there are links to the actual bills if you wanted to read the language. The agenda item memo has just the explanations, and so if there's questions, I have my computer open to be able to look at language in specific. You could do as well by just clicking on the little highlighted link in the agenda. Okay, so first bill is AB 646, and it requires the Department of Consumer Affairs to post on their license search the results of discipline matters. And this bill is requiring the board to remove, upon an expungement order presented to the board, remove past disciplines from the license search so that they're not continuing to be there. There are some differences of whether the person is currently practicing or reapplies for licensure. If they're not currently practicing, we would just remove it. If they are reapplying for licensure or eventually get relicensed, then we would need to post the actual expungement order on the license search. That's what this bill proposes. It's also proposing a $25 per request fee, which is very reasonable for the workload. And I'm glad that the author proposed it because generally there is workload that are required for any of these requests. So this is a very reasonable fee, and this would be available for any licensee that obtains an expungement order from a judge. We're not making a recommendation on this bill either way, but fiscally it's sound with the fee that is proposed to go with it, $25 per request. Questions? Okay, let's move to the next one. AB 657, Expedited License Process for Applicants Providing Abortion Services. This is one of the, just to provide some background, the governor pulled together, I think around the time or even before the time of the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs that overturned Roe v. Wade, pulled together a task force that worked with people to propose bills that needed to strengthen California's laws that would not prohibit women from having access to full range of reproductive care and not penalizing in any way doctors that are providing that care. And this bill, although not sweeping, is trying to make it easier for doctors that are potentially leaving states that are banning abortions and criminalizing doctors that want to come to California and continue to practice and serve women in their practice. So the board would be required to expedite their license, and we have other expedited categories such as military, asylum, military spouse. This would be added to that requirement, and they do have a requirement for documentation like we do for the other expedited categories, that they would have to demonstrate that they're actually going to provide abortion services in order to get the expedited license. So that is what this bill is requiring. We didn't have a recommendation to support, but it's a good policy. Moving to AB 1604, the Upward Mobility Act. The board may recognize this bill as one that the staff originally recommended a support and was asked to look further into it. And when we did, we withdrew that recommendation to support. They were mostly, while they do mention diversity and sort of tinker with the definition of diversity, which I think the board discussion at the last meeting had some concerns about, that language still remains. It never changed, so those concerns remain. And mostly the bill is dealing with exams and hiring for the state and Cal HR. So it really doesn't deal with the board or board compositions as much. And so we don't think that it would be necessarily a bill to recommend to support. Okay, moving on to the next bill, AB 1636. Physician Surgeon Certificate Registered Sex Offenders. This would authorize the board to deny a license on a formal discipline that occurred earlier than 7 years preceding the date of application if the formal discipline was based on conduct that, if committed in this state by a licensed physician, would have consisted of a sexual abuse, misconduct, or relations with the patient or sexual exploitation. Additionally, the bill would prohibit reinstating the license of a physician or surgeon that had their license revoked or surrendered because they committed certain sexual offenses, sexual misconduct with a patient. This bill doesn't have a fiscal, so it would not include more workload. It would just add this direction to the board in terms of your decisions on discipline. We did have some concerns about the clarification. Let's see, for the clarification of the different aspects of whether this would also apply to stipulations. The the statute is silent on that. And I think the Med Board took a position to support it, but with an amendment if they clarified that it would also apply to stipulations. We would support that same position. We're not recommending a position in this, but the board is free to take a position on this particular bill. This bill was brought because there was a concern, I think, that doctors that were disciplined for these areas of violations, sexual in nature, were getting reinstated somehow. And they felt like, from a public policy perspective, that shouldn't be. So that's the result of this bill.
I think we should take a position on this.
Okay.
I'd like us to take a support position with the caveat of what the medical board is recommending.
I'd be in support of this bill. Should we do a roll call?
Mr. President, this is Michael Kenneth, legal counsel. So we would need a motion to support and then have that second.
So do we have a motion to support?
I motion to support this bill, in conjunction with what Med Board is recommending, that we include also the other
Stipulation.
Mm-hmm.
That it apply to stipulation.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and it has been seconded. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Bihari?
We will need public comment on the motion.
We will now, at this time, moderator, open the floor for public comment on the motion to support this measure with stipulations to match what the Med Board recommends.
Certainly. And we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. You can click on the question mark in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. The other option is to raise your hand to request to be recognized. And we do have one hand raised from someone logged into WebEx as Tracy Dominguez. Tracy, I'm going to unmute your microphone and you'll have 2 minutes. And Tracy, you should see there you go.
Oh, you know what? I think my phone automatically did that. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
So no request for public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll take a roll call vote.
Dr. Bihari?
Yes.
Gary Damian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine?
Yes.
Motion carries.
The motion is carried. Okay, Terry, we can move on to the next.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next bill up is AB 1662, a licensing board disqualification for licensure based on criminal conviction. This bill would establish a process by which a prospective applicant or applicants may request a pre-application determination to whether their criminal history would be a cause for denial of a completed application for licensure. The board would provide that pre-application determination, among other things, be requested by the applicant at any time prior to the submission of an application, and would require the board to include specific written information regarding the criteria used to evaluate the criminal history and how the prospective applicant may challenge a denial by the board. The bill would provide a pre-application determination does not constitute a denial or disqualification of an application and would not prohibit, requiring a pre-application for licensure in any education or training program. So it would not have the effect of precluding them from applying. So they could get a predetermination about whether they would be denied a license or not and still be able to apply for the board license. And they would, the bill has a minor fee that if you look under the violation of the fiscal, does not in any way cover this. This is a bill right up front that the staff is recommending oppose for the following reasons. This bill came out of a series of bills that are trying to make good on people with criminal backgrounds and not prevent them from getting into the workforce or into professions. And the gist is, you know, if they have a criminal background, there's a feeling in the legislature that they would be denied automatically from licensure. And in our board, that would be the physician and surgeon. So the issue is also, training programs have also contacted the board asking, like, what should they do? Should they be accepting some of the residents that have a criminal background? Because for kind of the same reason, they're like, wow, it would be a waste to go through the residency if they're not going to get licensed. Okay, so this feeling of, gee, are they going to be licensed or not? Is it worth continuing on with their, you know, training is what's triggering this bill, okay? Very legitimate sentiment. The problem is the bill doesn't solve the problem. What it does is require the board to do exactly the same process of evaluating a license with a criminal background, and they make a determination. If we say, no, we would not license the person, then it triggers the same appeal that we have when someone's applied to the license, which would be a statement of statement of issues that's prepared by the AG. So we pay for the AG costs, we pay for investigative costs, and then we may pay for hearing costs too. And that's the predetermination. So then, if all's done and we still come to the same denial, they can still ignore that and reapply. But we have doubled the workload for every application that does this. And from a policy perspective, it doesn't make sense. And another reason that I think it's a bad policy is that the underlying requirements when an applicant applies to the board, they have an obligation when we ask, i.e. when Mark is asking, explain to me, you know, the circumstances around this criminal conviction. And the information he gets really helps him make a decision. And he's making a decision kind of on two aspects. Did the person really learn? Would they, so to the point that they would not do it again? And two, do they pose a risk to the public in continuing to practice? That's the decision he makes with a license application. So now he's in the same position to do that now, but now he has less leverage to ask the people for the information that would help him make that decision. So what we could very easily come up with is cases that we close for lack of sufficient evidence. We didn't get enough information. So that means our determination is based on insufficient evidence, okay? But it's still, we have to make a decision, and then that can be appealed. So what I'm saying is that it just is, it's not really solving the problem, and it never, at least for our board, a problem. We didn't deny anybody as a result of a conviction or a criminal history. We never did years ago. The universe is less than 5 people in years. So to add all of this workload, and the board cannot absorb it. This would have to be paid for by the bill, and we would need staff to do this bill. So for this reason, the fact that the policy is not achieving what it is trying to do in terms of its goal, and it's doing it in a way that just duplicates workload for no really good reason, and it jeopardizes, this is the harm it could do. If the board determines, this is the worst case scenario, the board determines you don't have enough evidence to know whether we should license this person because they didn't respond, they didn't give us anything. So then our determination is denied. Okay, we don't feel comfortable. We don't know if they're a public risk. We don't know anything. Okay, well, so then suppose they stop their education because of that. But if they had applied, just gone ahead and applied, and we got the information and we made this decision, yes, they're not going to be a public risk, we go ahead and license them, they'd be able to proceed. And so what this does is creates a false barrier to even though the bill's trying to remove a barrier, it's creating a false barrier that could dissuade people that would not otherwise, that would be licensed otherwise, that might get a bad decision from the board because of insufficient evidence. There was discussion in the legislature about the insufficient evidence. What should they require? So the discussion, good discussion, centered around, well, if you require too much information, then the person applying is going to be tainted. They're going to be automatically at a disadvantage in this predetermination because they're having to expose all of this, information about their criminal conviction that they may be embarrassed and not like to, present. But that is what the board has to use to determine whether the person is a risk to public safety. So in not requiring it, so the legislature decided, okay, so we won't require the information. That was a big kind of death knell to the quality and reliability of that first predetermination. We don't have the evidence. The predetermination decision is not going to be reliable for the applicant. The applicant could still apply anyway, And so if they can still apply, why don't they just apply and we only do it once, So anyways, that's the basis of the fiscal. We have put a fiscal on this that is very high because we're basically duplicating, and we anticipate anybody with a criminal background could do this, which is a lot more than the ones that would trigger some kind of initial review. So the duplication would require a staff person. It would require funding for investigations. We may have to subpoena. We have AG costs, and then we have potential court costs. And this is all for just a predetermination. So we think that this would be a very bad bill, and it would have harmful fiscals to the board, and we don't have the staffing without the additional staff to carry this out. Questions?
Would you recommend we take a vote on this? Okay, I would vote to oppose it, but we can entertain a motion to either oppose or support this. I would first entertain a motion to oppose this bill. Anyone move to oppose? Anyone move to support the bill?
Okay, no position.
No position on this bill.
Okay. Okay, moving on. AB 1954, Physicians and Surgeons Treatment and Medication of Patients Using Cannabis. This bill would prohibit a physician and surgeon from denying treatment or medication to a qualified patient based solely on a positive drug test for THC or a report of a medical cannabis use without first completing a case-by-case evaluation of the patient that includes determination that the qualified patient use of cannabis is medically significant to the treatment or the medication. It would provide that the use of the medical cannabis that has been recommended by a licensed physician or surgeon shall not constitute the use of an illicit substance in such an evaluation. The bill would provide that a physician or surgeon shall not be punished or denied any right or privilege for having administered treatment or medication to a qualified patient pursuing to a bill and consistent with the standard of care. Okay, the bill, in the analysis, the bill clarifies existing law related to the use of cannabis, and specifically, even though that cannabis is a controlled substance under federal law, the physician shall not deny the treatment to a patient that has tested positive for THC or using cannabis for medical treatment, and the physician shall not be punished. Okay, so this, as you probably know, is trying to protect the gray area of the fact that cannabis use is legal in this country, and anybody that is involved in it, including a patient-physician relationship, could be arrested or by federal agents, that are enforcing federal law as opposed to state law. So this is an attempt to try to clarify that neither patients nor physicians should be punished at all for use of cannabis. Now, I will say legally, because the federal law is still a controlled substance, this may be the best that we can do to clarify this issue as state law, because federal law always supersedes state law, but it's still a good attempt, in terms of a policy to make clear it is legal in California, and physicians shouldn't be afraid or penalized for treating patients with cannabis. And this would just be a violation, so we don't have a fiscal impact on this one. There is no fiscal impact.
But this is stating that it's for medical, that the marijuana has been given by a licensed physician, correct?
Yes.
From what I read?
Yes.
I had a question too. It says the bill would prohibit a physician from denying treatment. So that means if I had a patient that was given medical marijuana, but then they wanted to start, taking morphine, but my inclination is to not mix both together, is it saying that I'm not allowed to, basically what I'm trying to get at is this law, or is this bill trying to direct me with my medical judgment? Because that's kind of how I'm reading that first sentence.
I think it just says that you can't make your decision solely on the fact that they were positive for marijuana. If you believe that there's an interaction between the drugs that may be unsafe, and that's your medical opinion, then I think you're in the clear from this.
Yeah, I just don't like how it says that it would prohibit a physician from denying treatment. I know what you mean, based solely, but that's sometimes what we use. And so I just kind of get the impression that it's trying to um, direct me on how to practice. I don't know if I'm reading it the wrong way again, but thanks, Dr. Buhari, though, for clarifying.
Let me look at the actual language in the bill.
We're going to take a quick look at the language.
Okay. That's the intent language. Okay, so the intent language basically says the intent is not the actual statute, but you get the gist of what the legislature is trying to do with this bill. The bill would provide a physician and surgeon shall not be punished or denied any right or privilege for having administered treatment or medication to a qualified patient and consistent with the standard of care. Okay. Standard of care is important wording. Let's see if it appears in the, and it does. It appears in the actual statute. So in the statute, it adds the wording to the subsection C says, no physician and surgeon shall be punished or denied any right or privilege for having administered treatment or medication to a qualified patient within the requirements of this section and consistent with the standard of care. So I think, Dr. Patel, what you're suggesting is from a standard of care perspective, you would not want to, in your example, give the patient morphine, right? That would be consistent with the standard of care decision, right?
That's right, Terry. Any controlled substance in the community, the standard of care is not to provide people that are taking marijuana, prescribed or unprescribed, and also be provided opiate narcotics on a chronic basis.
Yeah, so since that's the standard of care, you would be covered by the standard of care.
Okay, got it. Thank you for clarifying that.
And I think that's why I wanted to look at the actual language, and I think that language was added for that exact reason. Otherwise, it is vague.
Yeah, because it looks like they're trying to tell us that we have to provide us. I can see it kind of becoming like this. Like people are like, well, you need to treat me because of this law. But I appreciate the clarification.
Okay, do you think that's good enough for your concerns?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Any other questions on this bill? Anybody want to take a position or no position, or should I move to the next?
I think let's move on. No position.
Okay, no position. Okay, next up, AB 2055, Controlled Substance Cures Database. And this bill is proposing to move the location of the Cures database from the Department of Justice to the California State Board of Pharmacy, which is in the Department of Consumer Affairs. We don't have a position on that. There's no, we don't anticipate a fiscal impact on this. So this is just proposing to change the location from Department of Justice to pharmacy. And for lack of better understanding of why, I think that there may be a perception in the medical field that people don't like the idea the Department of Justice has the Cures database, but that's where it is. They're administering it. So, and there are statutory protections for using it incorrectly, and also there are protections about who has access to it. So in that sense, they're not trying to fix who has access to the database or who doesn't, just the location.
Do you know what the intent of that is?
I don't. I think it was proposed, and some of the early things that I read in the analysis was talking about, again, like physicians groups not liking the location being in the Department of Justice. It felt kind of heavy-handed. But other than that, yeah.
Have you heard there could be greater efficiencies if this was moved to the pharmacy board? Because I can tell you firsthand that it can be a little clunky. The current way it is, we have to change our password extremely often, and it's really hard to keep track of what our password is, and we get locked out. And this is a mandate. We have to check cures before providing any opiate narcotic for the first time when we see somebody or are considering it. So and it's tracked too. So you know, they are tracking that. We are checking. And then it just feels like with the frequent password changes, it can become a hurdle because it's hard to, you know, it's not easy. So I just am wondering, is that kind of maybe, or have you heard if that was maybe the intent to move it? Because I could see that as a possibility.
Well, again, there's no guarantee that changing the location would change that password thing, obviously.
I know.
But it could be that there was a perception of whoever made this proposal that a better fit for this is the pharmacy board because they deal with pharmacy and they deal with records, and maybe they'll do a better job of
just a quick look at the wording in Section 3. It does say, identify and implement a streamlined application and approval process to provide access. So they are looking at streamlining it, and additionally, it looks like they want a procedure in place so if there's a practitioner who doesn't have a DEA number or if doesn't prescribe those scheduled substances, they can opt out of cures, where currently I don't believe that's in place.
Well, with that said, I would make a motion to support this.
Okay.
All right, well, let's move to, do we have to do public comment before that? Or if the motion on the table is to support this legislation, AB 2055 currently. Do we have public comment on that motion?
We would need to ask for a second.
Okay, so let's make a motion. Dr. Patel, motion for it. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Ms. Pine seconds the motion. Is there any public comment on this motion before we vote on it?
This is the moderator, and we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to accommodate public comment on the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in the text box, and click send. Your other option is to raise your hand to request a comment. Each person will be given 2 minutes. I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Machiko, can you perform a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Buhari?
Yes.
Dora Damian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Ms. Pine?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Moving on to our next bill, AB 2626, Medical Board of California and the Osteopathic Board of California, I should also say, license, discipline, abortion. This bill is part of that group of bills that's trying to address the recent Supreme Court decision overruling Roe v. Wade, and it's trying to clarify that physicians from the Medical Board and the Osteopathic Board would not be disciplined for performing abortions as they are being, as the laws are being changed in other states. And so they want to make it clear that physicians they would not be disciplined for performing abortions because it's legal in this state. This also has the effect of, because it's legal in this state, then the board, and it's illegal in another state, that one of the things that the board has an obligation to do when they look at discipline from other states is if the discipline would be for something like abortion, providing abortion services that is totally legal in this state, then we would not be looking at that out-of-state discipline for that. So this clarifies, has the added benefit of clarifying that. And although it's not illegal in this state, they want to make absolutely sure by this particular bill. Any questions?
I had a question, Terry. So if somebody was licensed in California and Texas, but then performed the abortion in Texas, then that would be under the jurisdiction of the Texas board. But then if that patient came to California, is that what they're trying to protect? That maybe that person lived in Texas and they came to California to see someone licensed in California to perform the abortion. Is that what they're trying to protect maybe?
I think what they're trying to protect is, in your example, the physician that's licensed, in your example, I'm just going to go with, both in California and Texas. If they perform the abortion in California, no discipline. If they perform the abortion in Texas and they're disciplined because they violated the Texas law, then we would get that discipline, okay? Because we look at all of out-of-state disciplines and review whether we need to take action based on that out-of-state discipline. But this is specifically setting up that because what's illegal in Texas is not the same in California, we would not take up that discipline case from Texas against the California licensed physician. So the California licensed physician would be free to, without penalty, perform abortions in California, and Texas, if they were disciplined for that, that would not come back to have a second discipline in California that was solely based on Texas's discipline, because that discipline is based on a law that is not the same as in California. So it's really protecting not so much the patient as the doctor.
I understand. Thank you so much. Definitely appreciate it.
Now, I just want to follow up, Dr. Patel, with your question about, you said you focused on the patient. So if you were saying that the patient went to Texas to the same doctor, had an abortion or something, or the doctor denied them in Texas because...
Yes, if the doctor referred his or her patient to California to have the abortion procedure done.
Right. So if it was the doctor that's duly licensed, because the referral would go to the the California side of him or her, then, and as long as the abortion was provided in California, there would be no harm.
Okay, thanks.
the
Sorry, that was a
Texas-
complicated question.
It was complicated, but well, it's a complicated issue, have you seen in the
Yeah.
newspapers, in terms of
Yeah.
dissecting the laws and the interactions. I mean, the states trying to ban it are trying to overreach and prevent patients from
Right.
going outside of the state, prevent doctors, intimidate doctors. Right. So the idea of a duly licensed doctor would be a complex situation, and they could in Texas be subject to intimidation, which is why we have are welcoming them with open arms to come to California, where they can practice, and they're not going to be harassed or penalized. Okay, so anybody interested in a position, or should I move on?
I'd make a motion to support this.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, there's been a motion to support this measure, and it's been seconded. Do we have any public comment on the matter?
This is the moderator, and we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If you've got a comment on the motion, please look for the question mark icon, and then in the text box, type the word comment and click send. Your other option is to raise your hand. And the hand icon is at the bottom of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. And I do not see any requests for public comment. I can close the Q&A feature.
Okay, Machiko, can we have a roll call vote, please? This is on the motion to support Assembly Bill 2626.
Dr. Buhari?
Yes.
Corey Damian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine? Yes. Motion is carried.
I wanted to make one comment. Terry, I think you skipped AB 2098.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I just remembered seeing that. Okay, so I want to go back to AB 2098, Physician and Surgeon's Unprofessional Conduct. This bill would designate a dissemination of information or disinformation related to SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus or COVID-19 as unprofessional conduct. The board analysis supports the intention of this bill, but is concerned over the vagueness of the term misinformation. This vagueness can be resolved with a clear definition of misinformation in the bill that ties the information to the standard of care. We would suggest that if we added again the wording, the standard of care, then that would be inclusive of like guidelines, because right now the COVID is controlled by CDC guidelines, controlled by state public health guidelines and local public health guidelines. But guidelines are guidelines. They're not statutes, okay? So there could be an interpretation of like, well, does that guideline hold enough kind of water that a statute would to be able to discipline somebody? So I think what the intention of this bill is to say that, one, from a pandemic and public health perspective, a doctor who's in the respected position with clinical training to go against the CDC and public health guidelines, state and local, would be not only doing a disservice, but could put the public at risk. And that was where this was coming from, that should be something not tolerated and disciplined. And we've had a lot of COVID-related cases in the enforcement, and I think there was the vagueness of what would constitute disciplinary worthy action came to place because all of our discipline is based in statutes, okay? And this is guidelines. So I think this is trying to put in statute that it is a violation and it's unprofessional conduct to disseminate and go against the otherwise clinical knowledge and guidelines and standard of care with respect to advising patients. And there were doctors that had examples, had websites, that were talk shows that were talking about alternative remedies. or not wanting to get the vaccine because it could be harmful or not effective, you know. So, and the guidelines, as you know, was saying that, you know, it's best overall to get a vaccine, you know, be prevention wary, wear a mask, et cetera. So anybody doing that, and particularly to their patients in that high regard and high statured position of advising a patient contrary to what the clinical practice like standard would be harmful. So that's what this bill is doing. We're suggesting just that it is going to be vague. So it does now add a statutory violation, but I think the board may still be in that vague area of interpreting. Did that website, what's the basis of that website causing misinformation? Okay, the website causes it, but it still it doesn't amount to discipline. You'd see you'll see these cases too going forward. And so the medical board also called this issue of vagueness out, and so we're in line with the medical board's recommendation. Support if amended.
I mean, my personal opinion is I agree with the principle behind writing it. The problem is it is a very slippery slope down to other aspects of medical care where, I mean, if you look on the web, you'll see I'm a cardiologist, you'll see all kinds of remedies for heart disease that aren't according to the standard of care or guidelines, but we don't sanction doctors and we don't sanction people for that. So, I mean, it's an interesting time around SARS-CoV-2, but I'd be against statutory things like this, disciplining physicians for not necessarily following a guideline or what is the standard of care.
Right, that's a good point.
I probably would be in support of this because I think it's specific to the pandemic, and you know, I being right in the middle of it, in the thick of it, when I see you know, misinformation kind of being actively peddled, it is extremely discouraging. So and frightening because, you know, people are receiving incorrect information where you know, if they got the correct information, then their lives could be saved. So it could be a matter of life and death here. And for that reason, I would support this.
My comment to that would be that I see that kind of thing every day with regard to cancer care.
Yeah.
And people being told that there are other natural remedies and things that are way outside the standard of care for oncology. And I'm saying this, even though this is specific to SARS-CoV-2 and the pandemic, I don't think it would stay that way very long.
I think, Dr. Bahari, your point is a solid one about, you know, kind of leads to why I explained the reason why they wanted to make the statute is because typically guidelines are not statutes. They're guidelines. They don't have the same import. They can't be enforced. So raising this out of guideline land into statutory land is a big step, and it does present a slippery slope, as you're saying, because a lot of you know, other areas also have that kind of informal advice. The only difference or distinction I would say is that this is only regarding a pandemic as opposed to other kinds of conditions. So maybe you could say that it's distinguished by the fact that it's limited to a pandemic, bad advice, as opposed to any other condition. That would be the only thing I would put out there for consideration. Both points are good. I mean, it's a solid, I think it's a good bill, but I understand the slippery slope. It's a good argument.
Yeah, I agree with Sai. I mean, I'm opposed to it because I think it is too much of a slippery slope, and then I think you can use this to expand into other areas of care. And, you know, frankly, you know, the reality is we're still practicing medicine. Nothing is still factual. You know, in 5 years from now, we may find out other things. So I'm just, you know, I understand what we're trying to do in terms of what happened with the pandemic and sort of the bad messaging that really ended up happening very, very early on and did impact people. But I think when we start to go down this space of a statute, I just think that we're crossing a place that we're going to regret down the road.
Maybe if I ask it a different way, okay, the statute clearly is triggering some concern, which it should. How would the board feel from a policy about disciplining doctors for having incorrect information on the website? The same? Would you treat it the same way as your objection to the statute? Or would you have a different outcome in terms of how you feel? Like, if we brought a case to you that was a doctor that had a website that was saying, don't take vaccines, don't do this, don't worry about, the pandemic, it doesn't exist, or whatever, this was misinformation, would you think that was something that a doctor should be disciplined for without this statute currently, under current laws?
I think each one of those miseducation type folks, they're all of it is like individualized to me. There's some people that's broadly saying, stuff, and then there's specific people saying, take this over that, giving a real directive, right? There's one thing that I'm putting out, here's what's inside this vaccine, and if you have particular sensitivities to things, you shouldn't take this vaccine. That's one thing. That's not, to me, misinformation. Then there's, don't take this, take this, right? A real directive. Those are very different. So I think that in this space, that's what we have. We have, individuals doing very different things, and what we're trying to do is clump all of that into one, misinformation notion. And, we've been dealing with this at the Federation, and the Federation has put out some very clear guidelines around this, because there's been a lot of analysis, and we've been getting this from all of the states, right? So looking at how all the states are thinking and interpreting this, and we put out a particular, sort of guideline around thinking. So my thought is maybe for us to go and look at that, maybe talk to the Federation and see how we would adjust this language.
Well, they came out with a statement early on, as you know, that said doctors should not be, it's for unprofessional conduct for doctors to be spreading misinformation. They were very clear. Some states followed that up and disciplined doctors. It has been, California has been sitting with this vagueness, does it warrant, based on without this statute, does it warrant disciplinary actions? And what would you base it on? A violation of guidelines, which are not otherwise enforceable, right? Legal counsel, am I correct on the guideline characterization as not enforceable?
Yeah, it would require a being added to the definition of unprofessional conduct, which is what the bill does.
So an underlying case would have to say, okay, what if we're judging, what is misinformation? Okay, and so we look at the facts and we say, does the misinformation deviate from, let's say, the CDC and the public health guidelines? Okay, it does. Let's say it does. We say factually it does. Where are we there for discipline? Well, where's the violation? We don't necessarily have it in statute. It's not necessarily unprofessional conduct. It's the position of the Federation of state medical boards that it is unprofessional conduct. We're not bound by that. That's just their position. They were, I think, trying to be good stewards in an uncontrollable situation that was unfolding fast in this country in terms of the pandemic. And I think it was good for them to do it. But now this bill is bringing the issue up more formally in California and would put it squarely in the board's disciplinary purview that, yes, you could bring an action for misinformation about COVID. But, it says COVID, but one of the things that I've looked in public health statutes is COVID isn't really listed in a lot of the emergency powers. The legislature didn't update it, so they're using like other pandemic diseases, like tuberculosis is the one that's in the statute, and then that gives all these emergency powers related to that disease. But there isn't, and so there was a jockeying of, did the governor have the authority to do the the waive things and stuff. All that debate happened because COVID wasn't in the statute specifically, and it was an interpretation of very vague emergency powers. So any kind of clarification like this takes that vagueness away, but it does create the slippery slope.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the spirit, but I still would be against it being in statute. And do what we do every day, which is discuss it individually with our patients and at whatever opportunity in our own communities to try and redirect the knowledge into what is the standard of care.
Yeah, just to add, what does concern me a lot is a lot of physicians, particularly in our osteopathic community, are kind of peddling this and using it for financial gain, which really is upsetting. And when someone says vaccines don't work, and what I see this as is what I define dissemination of misinformation is dissemination of lies that are not based on science. Like, for example, if someone's saying vaccines don't work, take the ivermectin instead. And if there are multiple studies that show that ivermectin doesn't work, and there's somebody that is kind of pawning off of some poor soul that is desperate for an alternative, it is that just seems criminal to me. So that's just my opinion. And like I said, I deal with COVID every single day, and I see patients that unfortunately are brainwashed, that don't understand and think that I'm a horrible person for not providing them with something that doesn't work. It's sad, and so I think this is it's a good step in trying to eliminate the lies being spread out there that are making our jobs difficult. We're trying to do the best for our patients, especially in a deadly pandemic. And I totally see the whole slippery slope, viewpoint there, but this is about a deadly pandemic, about SARS-CoV, and preventing the spread of lies and misinformation and treatments that clearly don't work, where life-saving treatments could be deprived from people because there are people out there that are spreading this for financial gain.
Okay, so I have the actual statutory language, and it does define misinformation, means false information that is contradicted by contemporary scientific consensus to an extent where its dissemination constitutes gross negligence by a licensee. Does that help this discussion? In terms of limiting, they're tying it to scientific consensus, not guidelines, and dissemination would constitute gross negligence. Gross negligence is an unprofessional conduct.
I would still be against it because I think that this type of legislation could be a template for other things.
Okay.
And if 20 years ago I told a patient that I wasn't going to prescribe aspirin for them for heart attack prevention, they could have said that I'm outside the standard of care, whereas today that's the current recommendation from the U.S. Preventative Task Force, that you do not. So things change.
Right.
And I think that although I agree with the spirit of this bill and I agree with everything that Dr. Patel just said, I don't think we should support it as a statute because I think it provides a template for something that really limits the care that we're going to deliver to patients and individualize patient care.
Okay. Are we satisfied? No position on this, or what?
So
it looks like we have a motion to support. Are we going to have a motion to oppose or just no position? Because we have one motion on the floor. I want to know if we're going to get a secondary motion to oppose as well.
I would move to oppose it. Well, we can start first. Why don't we start with, there's a motion, Dr. Patel has made a motion to support this legislation. Are there any seconds? No seconds. So I would make a motion the motion on the table is to not support this legislation or oppose this legislation. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We have any public comment on this motion?
This is the moderator, and we are opening the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. You may look for the question mark icon in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options. You may also raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And I see no request for public comment. I can close the Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Machiko, can you perform a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bihari?
Yes.
For Damian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine?
Yes.
Motion carried to approve.
Okay, good discussion.
Carrie, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
So I'm going to write an opposed letter to the legislature. Is there any specific wording you would like me to include, or just go back and listen to the
I think go back and listen to, but I would include that we support the spirit of the legislation, and that the board, of course, is is against licensees providing disinformation or information that is opposed to the standard of care for whatever disease we're talking about, in particular the pandemic maybe, but I think that would be the best thing.
Thank you, Doctor.
And then we could probably, Mark, use his aspirin example.
Yeah, I think including that we don't promote disinformation would be good,
Right.
But I think we have the problem with the.
Absolutely, I agree with what Dr.
I totally get it. Yeah. No.
Yeah, this is a great
good discussion. Really
because
good.
it fits exactly the two positions that you articulated very well about a slippery slope and what's good today is changed for tomorrow, but then the abuse of the misinformation in a pandemic is also harmful. So legislation is like a meat cleaver. It's not like a fillet knife. It's just very accurate.
You're right. Yeah, it's cut and dry.
So I have a question about just that overall. So if I'm thinking about like the very beginning, from the beginning of the pandemic towards the end of where we are now, there's all sorts of information, good or bad or whatever place you were taking it from. At that point, if this was something that was in place, like if somebody had deemed it misinformation, that you would just have, it would just cut them. I mean, there would be some penalty for making that misinformation, or what someone else would deem as misinformation at some point. Because there have been things that have been deemed misinformation in the very beginning of that towards now people are doing on a regular basis. So, that's the point, right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was an area of disinformation was around vaccines, and they did not, and in general, vaccines for kids. And then through the years, they tightened up the loopholes for vaccine exemptions. And the idea is that if it's required, then they have to have a medical reason, and a doctor has to do a thorough exam and a medical reason, to make a request for it. And then they have to have the public health department review that request. So that bill got honed over many years to try to deal with the vaccine opposition. So a lot of the opposition and misinformation was around vaccines, but not always, you know.
Terry, I'll add something as well, is I think the intent of this bill is to remove some of the gray area when it comes to this. But if this bill doesn't pass, it doesn't disallow us to open complaints of this nature and for the board to look into it. This, I think, the intention of the bill was for us to kind of put a finger on what that misinformation is and remove that gray area in our investigation.
Thanks for bringing that up, Mark. I kind of thought about that too towards the end, that, you know, even though if this bill doesn't pass, discipline can be obtained, you know, based on what our expert witnesses think and, you know, through the process. So thanks.
Okay, so let's turn to AB 2790. And this is reporting crimes, mandated reporters. This bill would remove the requirement that a health practitioner make a report to law enforcement when they suspect a patient has suffered physical injury caused by an assaultive or abusive conduct. Additionally, this bill requires the health practitioner who suspects that a patient has suffered physical injury that has been caused by domestic violence to provide brief counseling, education, or other support and what they call a warm handoff or referral to local and national domestic violence or sexual violence advocacy services. This bill also specifies that a healthcare practitioner is not civilly or criminally liable for any report that is made in good faith and is in compliance with these provisions. The intention of this bill was to improve how victims of domestic violence are handled by the mandatory reporting law. Instead of reporting law enforcement, the physician should refer them to counseling or domestic violence services. They may still report, but they are not mandated to report to law enforcement, if doing so may pose a risk or harm to the patient. This is a good policy bill because historically, physicians, as you know, the licensed members on this board are mandatory reporters. And if you're in an area of dealing with kids, if you're a pediatrician or you have exposure to domestic violence in your patient population, it can be a very, very dicey scenario because you're under the law to report it. And so you would be violating the law if you didn't report it, but reporting it can often make the situation bring harm to the patient or the child. And so this is an attempt to say, well, what we really need, and what I have heard doctors, I used to work for Planned Parenthood, and they were constantly dealing with this issue of incest. And that, you know, in an incest situation, the person that's the abuser is the parent. So then you know, if you're notifying the parent, you know, then that means the kid's probably going to be, you know, harmed. So Planned Parenthood was constantly saying, what do you do, you know? And so this is trying to say what you should, and doctors said, what do I do? I'm not an expert. And so what they're trying to do is, the expert is not the law enforcement. The expert would be referring them to, you know, to domestic violence and counseling services. So I think it's probably a policy that is a good idea, and it's a long time coming. And I think to remove that obligation from physicians as mandatory reporters will help. And it's allowing both ways. You could still report it to law enforcement, particularly if it's egregious, but you don't have to, and you're not going to be violating any laws if you don't. We didn't recommend a position, but it is a good policy. I think that we brought this bill because it does affect physicians. It doesn't so much affect the board because we're not, you know, the one that you're reporting it to. It's law enforcement, and it's a criminal reporting requirement. So doesn't mean you can't take a position if you want.
Any comment from the board members? Anyone feel strongly about taking a position on it?
I'd like to expand just a little about what Terry said. I think the policy of this bill is fantastic. You know, it is, our job at the board is to protect the public by ensuring that qualified doctors are licensed and to enforce doctors. Whereas I'm not sure, you know, this bill just changes the reporting requirement from reporting to law enforcement to sexual violence advocacy services. So I'm not, whereas I think the policy is fantastic, I'm not sure it's within our lane in terms of, you know, because our job is to protect the public. I'm not sure the doctors were, there was an issue beforehand. I think policy-wise, this is great, though.
We had discussed that this is a perfect, like, professional association type position because they're representing physicians. We're representing, you know, public safety precautions. So.
You think it's reasonable to make a motion, to take a motion up to support it then?
Yes,
Would it be
it
helpful?
is.
Okay.
It's a good.
Does anybody move to support this bill?
I move to support.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Kim seconds. It's been moved and seconded. Moderator, is there any public comment on the motion to support AB 2790?
This is the moderator, and we are opening the Q&A feature of WebEx for comments on the current motion. If anyone has a comment, they can click on the question mark icon, type the word comment in the text box and send, or you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on the lower bar of your WebEx screen, or if you're on a mobile device, behind the 3-dot other options. And I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Machiko, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Buhari?
Yes.
Gordanian?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine?
Yes.
Motion carried to support.
All right, the motion is carried.
Okay, very good. Let's move to the next bill, SB 189. I think Mark kind of already mentioned it in the report. This was a budget trailer bill. That means it's the bill that goes with the budget that explains stuff. That the bill that was giving the one-year open meetings law modification to a hybrid system was put into law based on this bill. So this has already happened, but we put it there just to memorialize. It was a bill, and now it got enacted sooner, because if it hadn't been in this trailer bill, we'd be waiting for the governor to sign it, and then it may not go into effect, depending on if it was urgency, until January. So we had got it early in terms of the hybrid, and it would save us money. We're estimating $14,000 a year. So I think, as Mark said, we're hoping this gets finalized beyond the year. It's kind of perplexing to not understand why the legislature is hesitant to do this, because, as you've seen, it, one, saves taxpayer dollars, but two, since we've done the webcasting, we've had more public participation by virtue of the webcasts than the local meetings. And we never had the telephone option prior to this. So, you know, it's the bill, I don't know if the legislature is concerned that it's somehow cutting off participation, but in fact it's promoting participation because everybody can join a webcast. They may not be able to travel to a particular location, which is what it was like before. So, okay, so let's move on to SB 731, deals with expungement of records. Now there's two kind of bills. The first one I talked about was an expungement that requires the board, when presented with an expungement order, to remove that discipline document from the license web search. This one deals with the licensee, and this would give them the right to apply for that expungement request. And so this one doesn't involve the board, but it does involve the licensees and their ability to apply for expungement. The purpose is to provide relief to those that are convicted, except sex offenders, when they apply for jobs so that they can apply for an expungement to have it removed from the license web search, and it would be. So the two bills kind of go hand in hand. One orders the board for a fee, provides for the fee for us to remove it. This one gives the licensees the opportunity to apply for the expungement formally. Any questions? Okay. Moving on. SB 923, Gender Affirming Care. This bill, it says existing law requires physicians and surgeons to demonstrate satisfaction of continuing education requirements, including cultural competency in the practice of medicine. This would expand the cultural competency training to include information and evidence-based cultural competency pertinent to the treatment and provision of care, individuals who identify as queer, questioning, asexual, or gender diverse, and the processes specific to those gender-affirming services. The bill expands the categories for required continuing education to include new topics pertaining to gender-affirming technology and resources. This new gender-affirming category is one of the many categories of physicians and surgeons may choose to meet their continuing education requirements. This one doesn't have a fiscal impact on the board, and I want to be clear, there are several statutory sections regarding CME, continuing medical education. The ones that are specific to requiring the 12 hours that you have to complete in specified topics. This is not in that section. There was a bill last year that added a whole list of categories that would be acceptable CME, including billing, office administration, and things like that. That's the section this is being put into. So it allows, the reason someone would put it in the statute is it allows the education to be created and the CME to be acceptable in meeting the license requirement for the 50 CMEs per year. So, questions?
So, Terry, just to clarify, you're saying this is not a requirement. Like, for example, the pain management, we need however many units. Is that what you mean? It's just allowing the creation of this CME to happen? Okay.
Yes. In the way that the statutory construction is, there's the first section that gives a whole range of topics. That's where this is being added to. And that list of topics gives the definition of what's acceptable subjects for continuing medical education. But then another section says, but all physicians at one time and one time only have to complete 12 hours of either, and then they've added, I think there was pain management, geriatrics, and maybe opioid education. That is not in this is not being added to that section. So that 12 hours did get changed, I think, to add one, I think, opioid to that required, and that's an either or in that required section. The 12 hours can be a combination of either this or that, and then the rest of, and then that's a one-time only. You have to do that within the 4 years of being initially licensed. Then you don't have to, that requirement is satisfied.
So if someone wanted to use the cultural competency training towards their CMEs and it included these topics, then
it would be allowable.
Currently, is it not allowed?
You know, I don't know that it's not allowed because it could be considered cultural competency, which is right now a topic. So I don't think it's disallowed right now.
I mean, there are topics like this in some of our CME conferences. Yeah. And they're granted CMEs.
Right. And if they're AOA approved and AOA accredited, the board would accept it without this bill. So the bill is, I don't think the bill is removing any barriers. I think the bill is more making a cultural statement about that this should be, just like the changes through the years in cultural competency, is trying to alert or use the medical education as the means to be able to educate the medical profession to be aware of things that impact both their advice, their judgments, and the way they treat patients overall. And so this is continuing in that, gender-related. And it is, I think, all of the smart CME providers are jumping on this already. And so we would accept it. Our basis for CMEs is if they're American Osteopathic Association accredited, we accept it. And for the 20, and then for the rest of them, if they're AMA or AOA, ours is the accreditation. And I don't see why they wouldn't. And if you're confirming for me that you've already seen this type of training, then yes, we would accept it even without this bill.
Right.
Okay, moving on. Okay, last two bills. SB 1441 as it turns out, is a sunset bill for somebody else, other boards, but it has some language in there that requires the board to establish a review of procedures that reflect emerging and innovative medical practices for licensed physicians. It would require the board to annually review and update, if necessary, these policies and procedures. Okay, this would be a significant workload, and it's not that the spirit is not good, innovation, but for a board, you saw how long and how detailed the work was in doing, reviewing the cannabis guidelines. Any kind of innovation would have to be reviewed not only by the board, but there would have to be some kind of synopsis of research out there on a given topic, and we would probably have to convene some expert committees, which this board has never done, not that we can't. I know the medical board does it, but it's a huge, meeting facilitation, and that kind of study group is, of a professional caliber, very time and costly. It involves travel and time, and you have to have, the meetings have to be facilitated by very high-level professional research of summarizing what is out there in terms of an innovation that the board should consider that, we haven't. So we're not against it, but, the board just says, this is a statement. It doesn't come with any money. It doesn't come with any resources. So we are putting it out there as something that's in the language that we're responsible for, but we're not recommending a position for that reason. The board is always free to pick a topic they want to look at, review, and even do professional evaluations for, create guidelines or whatever. We don't need this statute to do it, but it's there. Okay, and our last bill, I'm going to turn over to Mark, since he's been the lead on this bill.
Did I miss the military service bill?
Oh, yeah, maybe. Did I miss?
Mind.
Oh, I did miss the military. Sorry. I flipped it over too fast. Thank you, Mark. SB 1237, military service. This is just amending our current military bill that waives the fee and waives the CME requirements for active military. I guess that is for, currently the bill is for only in-state. This also applies for licensed doctors that are licensed in California but out of state in their location. It just extends the same kind of waiver, and so that's what it's addressing. Is that
how do we find out that they're called up to active duty? They inform us typically.
Yes, they inform us, and so they have a choice of if they're suddenly called. Usually, what it looks like is if they're active and they're suddenly called overseas, they will contact the board and say, hey, I want to go to a military license. And then that would mean that they would not have to renew. If they're saying they're going to be placed overseas for like 3 years, that would be beyond their renewal time frame. So then we put them in a military license status, so they wouldn't have to pay the fee and they wouldn't have to do their CMEs. And so they would contact us to do that. And so I guess the gap was that And we have a significant amount of out-of-state licensees that are licensed in California, but are out-of-state and in the military that we, I think, inadvertently excluded. But because they're licensees of California, the legislature wanted to include them as well.
And the National Guards, basically,
yes,
right?
Yes. If they're serving, yeah. So the state boundary is not the determination. It's their status and their license status in California that would make them eligible for this military waiver. Okay, now moving on. Is that the last bill, Mark?
I'll present Senate Bill 1443. So at our April 14th, 2022 board meeting, one of the agenda items was for board members to approve proposed language to eliminate our prorated licensure process, because it was creating an issue in that with licensees having to demonstrate compliance of completing 36 months of postgraduate training at their first renewal. If you can get licensed at 12 months, there's no guarantee you're going to have 36 months at that first renewal, because your first license could be 12 months to anywhere to 24 months. So the odds of actually having the 36 months were a lot more slim than actually having it at that first renewal. So board members, you approve that proposed language to go find an author or include it in legislation. So Senate Bill 1443, it is the sunset bill for a few of the DCA programs, the Dental Board, the Board of Accountancy, and the Architects Board. But specific to our board, the amendment on June 21st, 2022 included eliminating our prorated licensure process in statute. So this is a big deal for us. I think it'll help us comply with SB 806. It'll reduce workload in that aspect, and that we're not going to have to keep track of when they have to comply with it, first or second renewal. And kind of the residual positive impact of this as well is with not knowing what that license fee is going to be until they're actually approved, knowing what it is, we're going to be able to, we're going to look into it, is collect both fees at the time of application. Because right now, if you get approved, you have to get sent a billing letter, which takes a few more weeks to process. So if we can eliminate that part of the process, I think it'll be great. I think we can get an application, take a look at it, gather the documents, and once that application is approved, the license gets issued at that point. So that's kind of the residual effects of eliminating the prorated licensure as well. There's no fiscal impact as a result of this bill. It's revenue neutral, since that license fee is prorated. Your charge, which is essentially $17 a month, is what it kind of breaks down to. It just kind of changes when we get it. We're going to get a full $400 up front, which is good for 2 years. Whereas now, it's prorated based on when that expiration date is, because currently your expiration date is the month of your birthday. So that's in a bill. That's something that we're excited about. Just a little background. After our meeting, I contacted, the legislative liaisons, that are all the information we had, and it popped up on June 21st in this bill. So we're very thankful for that, and we're excited about this bill going through. And since it is a sunset bill for a variety of the boards here at the department, our anticipation is that it will go through. There's a very high likelihood. I'm not going to put the cart ahead of the horse, but I'm excited about this.
Yeah, it's proposed for the consent calendar. It's not been heard yet, so.
Yeah, so
that's a good sign, that it'll just go through. There's among the things that it means that it's already gone through the Republican caucus, and it's not been identified as controversial in any way. So it can go, they anticipate members would all support it.
Should we support it? I mean, it'd be helpful to support anyways, right?
It goes without saying that
sure.
I am recommending that we support
that.
So
I'd make a motion I'd entertain a motion to support. Anybody? Someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Dr. Patel makes a motion to support this measure. Any seconds?
Second.
Dr. Kim seconds. Is there public comment on the motion to support Senate Bill 1443?
This is the moderator, and we are opening up the public comment feature in WebEx. If you would like to make a comment on this bill or the board's position on it, you may look for the question mark icon. And then once you click that, type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand. The hand icon is at the bottom of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other option if you are on a mobile device, or you may press *3 if you are a call-in user. And I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Machiko, can you perform the roll call vote?
Will do. Dr. Bihari?
Yes.
Roy Damien?
Yes.
Dr. Kim?
Yes.
Dr. Patel?
Yes.
Denise Pine? Yes. Motion carried to support.
The motion is carried.
Okay, that's the end of my ledge report. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss these policy issues. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's often at the end of the meeting when people are tired. I think you had a lot of energy, and it's good to discuss issues even if they're hard.
Thank you, Terry. Any other comments? Nope. Let's go ahead and move on to agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 9, future agenda items. Any discussion from the board on addition of items to the future, the next meeting agenda?
So currently, we have the enforcement process in December is what I have written down. If there's anything else we'd like to see, we'll take care of that as well.
Okay.
I know there were some comments about the notifications on the website. Perhaps we could just kind of go over what our current, workflow is if we do have a situation where we have to change the meeting. How soon is it posted on the website? Yeah.
Any other potential items for the next agenda from board members? No? Any public comments from the moderator on future agenda items?
And this is the moderator. We've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a suggestion for something to be discussed at a future meeting, you can look for the question mark icon, and then in the text box, type comment and click send, or you may raise your hand. And we do have a raised hand. We're hoping for better connectivity this time. For Michelle Monserrat Ramos, I will be sending you a request to unmute your microphone. And you should have seen a pop-up in your WebEx app letting you unmute. And my apologies, I don't know what exactly is different about the connection, but this seems to not be presenting Ms. Montserrat with the option to unmute herself. And we do have a hand raised from a calling user. Shall I move on to that person?
Yes, please.
All right, so calling user, if you press *6, you should be able to unmute yourself. You're unmuted.
Good afternoon. This is Michelle Montserrat Ramos. I'm calling from Consumer Watchdog. And I had some comments on agenda item number 7. I'll send them to your executive director. I would like for a future agenda item, a presentation specifically on 805 reports, how they are received, how some are chosen for investigation, what information is available to the public on the physician profile, such as a notation, 805 report, hyphen, hospital loss of privileges, et cetera. Thank you.
And there are no further requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 10 on the agenda, which is future meeting dates. Machiko, can you tell us what we have for the rest of the calendar year anyways?
Currently, we have December 8th on the calendar. I have a tentative approval of reservations for this room, and we have no other dates on the calendar at this time.
Want to pick a couple?
Dr. Bahari, I'll just share. So we've typically had the meetings at the very least in January, April, or May, and then we pushed it forward into August, this meeting, just to give us a chance to take positions on the bills, because when we had it in September, I think Denise brought it up. It was just too late.
Yeah, we ended up behind the 8 ball on those.
Yeah.
So do you want to pick a January meeting?
Would we like
it'll be close after the December meeting.
Right.
But
do we want to stick with January for right now?
I think we should have a January meeting. That's typically the time that we do the board president and vice president nominations.
Okay.
So for January, if we would like to do Thursday, there's the 5th, the 12th, the 19th, or the 26th.
I would push for either the 19th or 26th.
I'm fine with either of those.
19th?
These are all, will there be an option to do it virtually?
We would like to continue doing hybrids. It's pending. When does SB?
Okay.
So SB 189 is good through July. So SB 189 is good through through July. So if that doesn't get extended or a permanent solution is put into place, we could do it virtually, but you'd have to disclose your physical location. Under SB 189, you could do it virtually without disclosing your location, so you could actually do it within your residence or whatever. So there is that change after July.
Yeah, so if we did another meeting in April or May, then that would be covered by it.
Okay.
So having said that,
So January 19th.
January 19th,
Yes, okay.
for the one after December, and then why don't we pick one for, you want to do May sometime?
Okay, so we have the 4th, 11th, 18th, or 25th.
4th, 11th, 18th, 25th. Of May, we're talking about May. 18th is off the table for Dr. Adamian. What about, Mr. Adamian, what about 11th or 25th?
Yeah, I think 11 or 25th is good. There looks like there's a FSMB meeting that first week, so maybe not the 4th, but 11 or 25.
Okay. Denise, you have a preference between the 11th or the 25th? You've got a long distance to travel. 11th?
And that works for you, Michael?
That, okay, so why don't we go ahead and make it with the 11th? I think that should work best.
And that's good, legal counsel? Okay. So May 11th. And then, do we want to shoot for an August meeting, if we can?
Sure.
So for
I'm free
August,
any Thursday. So.
in August?
Yeah.
So we have the 3rd, 10th, 17th, 24th, or 31st.
I'd push for 17, 24, or 31st. The first week tends to be a little bit tough because the high schoolers, for us at least, goes back to high school usually in that second week.
Right.
Yeah, so why don't we do 17 or 24? Any preferences from anybody on either of those? 17, okay. Does that work for everybody? August 17th? Hamesh?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so why don't we go with August 17th?
So Dr. Bahari, I do have a follow-up question. So at least for the first two, we'll have the option to do it completely virtually. Do we want to get together in person on one of these meetings, and do we want it to be here? Do we want to travel down south to make it available for the public down there in person? What's our thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm always more in favor of in-person than Zoom where it's possible, okay? And I would not be opposed to going down south.
I know, just to throw it out there, I know that some of the schools expressed interest in hosting a meeting. So
yeah, we've done that before at both Toro and at Comp, and they were pretty enjoyable. I like doing it because you got a lot of student involvement, and that's something that we miss now with what COVID has done to these meetings.
Yeah.
Where we used to have a fair amount of students traveling up here for these. You think we could reach out to Western?
I can reach out to Western. I know previously a lot of the issue was,
I know previously the scheduling issue was with the students' final exams and beginning. So
that's true.
I'll see what works for them so that we have a maximum amount of student participation.
Okay.
If that's what we want. And then, but I will give them the date of the 17th and see if that's okay with them.
Okay.
And Machiko, if you need contact information, I know one of the physicians was really helpful because I did when we had to report our location, I did it at Western. She was really helpful. So if you need that contact, let me know.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
No worries.
All right, so possibly. So August 17th is a tentative then, and tentatively would be down in Pomona. You want to round out the year and do a December one? And then if things need to change, we can change it.
Sorry, did you say August 17th?
Yeah, that's the tentative. Some of that may change depending on the school's preference.
You're talking about 2023. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's correct.
Sorry,
next year.
Confused. Okay.
See you in a couple weeks.
And then for December, we have the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, or the 28th.
I would lean for 7th. That way you keep the last few weeks if people want to take their winter break.
Vacation. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Are there any public comments on the future dates that we were talking about just now?
This is the moderator, and I've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to accommodate for public comment. If there's any comment about the tentative dates for the future board meetings, you can raise your hand or you can use the Q&A box. We do have one raised hand from Michelle call-in user. Again, to remind you, *6 will unmute you. You're unmuted.
Hello, this is Michelle Montserrat Ramos from Consumer Watchdog. I have a comment actually about a future meeting. It's a December 8th meeting. Obviously, I'm having extreme technical difficulties doing this virtually, and it's going to be a very important presentation for my advocate families to participate in. And I want to know the possibility of an off-site location I can go to in the Los Angeles area. Thank you.
And there are no further public comments. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
last agenda item, which is adjournment. All right. The meeting is adjourned. It is August 10th, 2022, and the time is 1:20 in the afternoon Pacific time. Thank you, everybody.